فندم هنجيب كراسي
ترجمة فورية متاحة بالعربي والإنجليزي، وفي سماعات موجودة تقدروا تسمعوا الترجمة من خلالها لو حبيتوا. اللي عاوز استاذنكم يرفع ايديه بحيث انه حد يديله سماعة. هقول ده بالإنجليزي سريعا. There is simultaneous translation available in Arabic and in English. If you would like to listen to the translation, please use the headphone and raise your hand to get one. أحب برضه أقول إن في صفحة فيها تفاصيل عن كل متحدث النهارده وفيها رابط لتفاصيل أكتر عن الندوة والمتحدثين، وتقدروا تشوفوا الصفحة دي من خلال QR كود اللي موجود في الريسبشن بعد الإيفنت. النهارده هيتم إطلاق سلسلة ندوات بعنوان الطريق لصنع السياسات المبنية على الأدلة بالشراكة بين مختبر النمو التابع لبنك الطعام المصري والمعهد الدولي لبحوث السياسات الغذائية FP ومؤسسة ساويرس التنموية الاجتماعية تحت مظلة وزارة التضامن الاجتماعي. بشرفنا النهارده بحضور معالي الوزيرة نجيب حباش وزيرة التضامن الاجتماعي. أهلا بحضرتك معالي الوزيرة. برحب أيضا بالسادة نواب الوزراء، أستاذ دكتور خالد العطار نائب وزير الاتصالات وتكنولوجيا المعلومات، وبنتشرف أيضا أهلا بكم. بنتشرف ايضا بحضور ممثلين من جهات مختلفه موجوده النهارده، ممثلين من جهات بحثيه ونفاذين برامج تنميه، منظمات غير حكوميه والمجتمع المدني، سواء هنا في القاعه او خارجين في البث المباشر. بشكل مختصر هدف من سلسله الندوات اننا نساهم في محاولات تحقيق التنميه في مصر من كونها مبنيه على النتائج الى ان تصبح مبنيه على الاثر والادله. هنشرح النهارده بالتفصيل الهدف من السلسله، وهنتناول موضوعات متعلقه بتقييم اثر برامج الحمايه الاجتماعيه. وده هيكون اول موضوع في سلسله الندوات. وهيتبع لكم النهارده ندوات تاليه ان شاء الله هنتكلم فيها عن موضوعات اخرى متعلقه بتقييم الاثر. النهارده هيكون في 3 جلسات. اول جلسه هيعرض بشكل مختصر جدا الهدف من سلسله ندوات ممثلين الشراكه استاذ عبد الرحمن نجيب مدير التعلم والاستراتيجيات في مؤسسه ساويرس، دكتور كيبروم ابراهيم زميل باحث ومدير برنامج مصر التابع للمنهج الدولي للسياسات الغذائيه SFSD، ودكتور محمد الكرماني مدير مختبر النمو في بنك الطعام المصري. بعدها هيتفضل ممثلين من القطاع العام والقطاع الخيري والبحثي بإلقاء كلماتهم، واخيرا جلسه عرض نتائج ابحاث عن اثر برامج الحمايه الاجتماعيه. هنقدر نجاوب من خلالها على اسئله الكل. نبدا دلوقتي بعرض عن اهداف سلسله الندوات. استاذ عبد الرحمن، دكتور كيبروم، ودكتور محمد.
شكرا جزيلا وميرسي لينا على المقدمه دي. الحقيقه انا سعيد جدا ان عندنا تقريبا 6 شهور او 7 شهور بنخطط ونطبخ الشراكه دي. يعني كده الصوت واضح بتاعي ولا واضح؟ بنخطط ونطبخ الشراكه دي ما بين إفبري، ما بين بنك الطعام، وما بين ساويرس فاونديشن. والحقيقه الشراكه دي هي جزء من التعاون بتاعنا اللي احنا بدأناه او فكرنا فيه من حوالي 2 سنين. ازاي نقدر كساويرس فاونديشن ندعم الشركاء بتوعنا المحليين والدوليين ومشاركه الادله العلميه في قطاعات التنميه. وده يمكن يتواكب مع الفكره اللي احنا كنا دايما بنقولها ان مجال التنميه تطور في ال 20 سنه اللي فاتت من تركيزه على الهاو او على الكيفيه، ان يركز اكتر على الوات، على الهدف، وعلى الواي، ليه بنشتغل دوت، وكمان على مين بيتقدم له الخدمه دي. والحقيقه يمكن دايما بنقول وبنأكد ان العمل في مجال التنميه مع زياده التحديات المستمره كل يوم، وكمان مع قله الموارد المتاحه عالميا، بيخلينا مضطرين ان احنا دايما نستخدم اكتر وناخد اكبر قرارات مبنيه على ادله علميه. ما بقيش عندنا خلاص رفاهيه ان احنا نبني برامج على بناء على خبرات فقط او بناء على نوايا طيبه فقط. الحقيقه مفيش في الوقت ده، محتاجين حاليا نبدا ونشتغل فقط على الادله العلميه الصارمه اللي تضمن بشكل اكبر ان احنا قادرين نشوف بوتنشال او عندنا احتمالات نجاح اكبر ان شاء الله بالاعتماد عليه. النهارده هيكون اول لقاء لينا لسلسله ان شاء الله نتمنى انها تمتد لمده طويله من عدد كبير من السلاسل. النهارده هنركز على الحمايه الاجتماعيه، ونركز اكتر على نتائج برامج زي باب امل اللي احنا بنفخر بيه كمؤسسه ساويرس، وعلى نتائج برامج اخرى إفبري ونماذج من جاي بلان اشتغلت عليها بتركز على قضيه الحمايه الاجتماعيه. بتشرف موجود معاكم النهارده، وهسيب دكتور كرماني يكمل الباقي.
صباح الخير، اشكرك يا احمد على الملخص السريع لسلسله الاحداث. اهلا بيكم ومتشكرين بوجودكم معانا النهارده، ونتمنى باذن الله البدايه بتاعت سلسله الندوات اللي احنا هنعقدها يكون فيها افاده لكل الناس الحاضرين. استكمالا اللي كان عبد الرحمن بيقوله، احنا فعلا ابتدينا نشتغل على الشراكه دي من حوالي يمكن 6 شهور او اكثر، وكان الهدف بتاعنا باختصار شديد ان احنا كمؤسسه ساويرس للتنميه الاجتماعيه وبنك الطعام المصري كمؤسسات بدات تاخد فكر جديد وتتبنى رؤيه وفلسفه مختلفه، ان الكلام ده ما يقفش لحد عندنا بس، ان احنا لا بالعكس احنا شايفين ان الطريق اللي احنا ماشيين فيه ده ممكن يكون فيه استفاده كبيره للمجتمع المصري، وبالتالي عايزين ننقل ما وصلنا اليه لمختلف المؤسسات المجتمع المدني بشكل اساسي والجهات الحكوميه برضه، لانه احنا يمكن بنشتغل على سكيل صغير قوي اصغر من السكيل اللي الدوله بتشتغل عليه، لكن عندنا القدره ان احنا نعمل بعض الاكسبيرمنتس وبعض التجارب اللي نطلع منها بنتائج ايجابيه ننقلها للدوله، والدوله تستطيع ان هي تتبناها وتتوسع فيها. فالنهارده البدايه، لكن الفتره الجايه ان شاء الله هيكون كل شهرين عندنا حدث بشكل مختلف. مش كل الاحداث هتاخد الفورمات اللي احنا فيه ده، في احداث ثانيه هتاخد شكل يمكن مكثف في بعض الاحيان في صوره راوند تيبل او راوند تيبل ديسكشنز، في بعض الاوقات ممكن نتكلم على حاجات زي ورك شوبس مع مؤسسات المجتمع المدني تساعدها ان هي تبدا تطور وتغير من فلسفتها وبرامجها ان هي تكون مبنيه على ادله علميه. بشكل سريع حابب ان انا اشكر معالي الوزير على حضورها النهارده. والله كلام من القلب، واعتقد ان كل الناس اللي موجودين في القاعه يتفقوا على ان المساحه اللي المؤسسات المجتمع المدني واخداها في الفتره الحاليه ما كانتش هتحصل غير بوجود ودعم حضرتك. التحول من الجهه الاداريه لوزاره داعمه ومسانده لكل الجمعيات الاهليه في مصر. حابب اشكر طبعا مؤسسه ساويرس صديقي العزيز عبد الرحمن ناجي مهندسه نور ستيل، لان الحقيقه كمؤسسه مانحه ما كانش عندهم الاحتياج ان هم يتحولوا الى هذا الشكل من التوجه، كانوا يقدروا يستمروا بنفس الشكل، لكن هم عايزين فعلا يعملوا اثر ايجابي في المجتمع المصري. حابب اشكر طبعا كيبرون على مشاركتهم معانا في دراسه. ان شاء الله النهارده هنعرض نتائج منتصف المده لقياس اثر برنامج التغذيه العامه في بنك الطعام المصري. وقبل ما اختم حابب اشكر كل المجموعه اللي اشتغلت على ال6 شهور اللي فاتت. يمكن في مجموعه من ال3 مؤسسات هي اللي اشتغلت بكثافه واشتغلت يعني بشكل يومي لحد اخر يوم في رمضان كانوا يشتغلوا. فاحب ان انا اشكرهم وكلنا نشكرهم لينا. من مؤسسة ساويرس، سارة مريم وسارة الحداد من بنك الطعام المصري.
So my Arabic is not yet good, so I'm going to speak in English. Your Excellency Dr. Nivin, Minister of Social Solidarity, Dr. Khalid, invited guests and partners. I'm very pleased to be here and launch this seminar series with my colleagues and partners. This is a seminar series titled Bridging Evidence and Policies, and the main objective of this event, this series, is to bridge and get research and evidence further. And I'm sure that you will agree that this has been much more important than ever with the recurring crisis that we are facing, where we definitely need to refine and inform our public policies to and responses to this crisis. And obviously, this is one demonstration and a footprint of one of the successful collaborations we have had. We are having with the Sawiris Foundation, with the Egyptian Food Bank, as well as other partners. I'm sure that the dialogue, discussions, deliberations, research, and lessons we'll continue to bring during in this seminar series will inform public policies and responses to support vulnerable households and smallholders in Egypt. I know that this has taken a lot of effort, and I think I would thank you, Mohammed, that you mentioned, and appreciate our colleagues. I would like to repeat that. Thank you, colleagues from IFPRI, the Egyptian Food Bank, Sawiris Foundation. Without your support, without your leading this would not have been a reality. I also would like to appreciate other organizations who are supporting us to do our research, who are supporting us to implement our research, including the USAID, particularly supporting some of the research that are going to be presented here. I also know that without the support of our partners from the government, particularly the Ministry of Social Solidarity, this wouldn't have got a lot of traction and success. And again, I would also like to appreciate the collaboration and partnership with our implementing partners, including the Egyptian Food Bank and other partners, which have been very committed to support evidence-based policy making, support their programming through evidence and research. And of course, I would definitely appreciate the support of the Sawiris Foundation, who have been very keen and committed to support evidence-based policy making and research-informed public policies. With that, I'll end here and then I'll come back soon. Thank you very much.
هو رئيس تنفيذي بنك الطعام المصري وللاسف ما قدرش يكون بشده جدا. بس هو سجل لنا فيديو قصير هشغله دلوقتي لحضراتكم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا محسن رحلة، رئيس تقييم بنك الطعام المصري. أخبر بنفسي، اخترت إن أنا أسجل الفيديو القصير ده عشان أقول لكم أنا قد إيه متشرف وسعيد إن إحنا قاعدين النهارده نتكلم بصوت واحد وقلب واحد. فالكونفرنس الأول إزاي نقدر نستخدم الإيفيدنس في enhancing social protection programs في مصر. طبعا ساعات دي جايه من عنوان زي ده.
واحنا مش عملنا بتاع
تعاقد في مجال الحمايه الاجتماعيه وفي مجال تحويل الجيمز او المكتسبات اللي على مستويات الاقتصاد الكلي الى خدمات عادله وقريبه جدا بايدين كل انسان يستحقها على ارض مصر او اي مكان في العالم. حاليا دلوقتي احنا في مصر طبعا وداخل احداث بنواجه مجالات تضخميه مؤثره على كثير من الاسئله الاساسيه وده كمان مؤثر على مبنى خلال الطعام المصري في تطوير الامن والغذائي مباشره. ولذلك مرحلتنا حاليا ان احنا نفكر ازاي نقدر نقدم الخدمات لمن يستحقها بشكل كفء جدا بلا اي تحميل لا يعود على تكلفه هذه الخدمات. فده رقم واحد. رقم اثنين ان احنا ازاي نبقى بريسايز جدا او نبقى يعني دقيقين جدا في التارجتنج وفي استهداف من هم المستحقين هذه الخدمات ونبقى بريسايز جدا برضه ان احنا نعرف الخدمات اللي احنا بنقدمها دي تدي الناس اللي هم عايزينه ولا لا. طب ايه الطريقه المثلى ان احنا نقدر نوصل بيها للهدفين دول؟ ان احنا نستخدم العلم. نستخدم التجارب اللي متراكمه عبر سنوات وسنوات نفس الامراض ونفس المشاكل الاجتماعيه اللي احنا شغالين فيها هنا على ارض مصر ونحاول ان احنا نطلعها لخدمه المجتمعات المحليه وده يمكن هو الكور او الصميم اللي احنا بنتكلم فيه هذا الكونفرنس وفيما يليه ان شاء الله. ان شاء الله رحله طويله وجميله وشيقه لينا كلنا واحنا بنستكشف اكثر مع بعض احنا ازاي نقدر نخدم الانسان بشكل اكثر كفاءه واكثر فعاليه واكثر تفضيلا من اللي الانسان عايزه. فخور جدا بالرحله اللي احنا مشيناها مع بعض وفخور جدا بشراكتنا الجميله والمستمره مع بعض. كتر خيركم جميعا انتم في معانا في هذه الرحله الجميله. السلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته واشوفكم جميعا.
شكرا جدا للحضور. المهندسة نورة سليم ساويرس التنموية الاجتماعية. استاذ انت تفضل.
صباح الخير السيدات والسادة، الحضور الكريم، السيد الدكتور خالد العطار نائب وزير الاتصالات، معالي وزيرة التضامن الاجتماعي الدكتورة نبيل القباش، متشرفين بوجود حضراتكم معانا النهارده. باسم مؤسسة ساويرس أنا فعلا بيسعدني وبيشرفني ونيابة كمان عن شركائنا من بنك الطعام المصري والمعهد الدولي لبحوث في سياسات الغذاء إن أنا أرحب بحضراتكم في هذا الحدث الخاص بإطلاق سلسلة ندوات بعنوان الطريق لصنع السياسات المبنية على الأدلة، والتي يتم تنفيذها تحت رعاية وزارة التضامن الاجتماعي بهدف التعلم وتبادل الخبرات ومعرفة التدخلات الأمثل وآثارها وفتح باب النقاش والتعاون بشكل تشاركي بين الجهات الفاعلة في المجتمع المدني. حقيقة احنا مؤسسة ساويرس اللي بقالنا 21 سنة بنشتغل كمؤسسة منحة تنموية بتركز على التدخلات في مجالات التعليم وفي مجالات خلق فرص العمل، وبقالنا كذا سنة مهتمين جدا ان احنا كمان نكون مؤسسة دائمة التعلم، مؤسسة بتبني كل برامجها وكل مشروعاتها على الأدلة العلمية. لسه مش 100% النهارده ولكن هي رحلة. وأنا سعيدة جدا بوجود زميلي الأستاذ عبد الرحمن ناجي وجميع زملائي من قطاع التعلم والاستراتيجيات في مؤسسة ساويرس والقطاعات الأخرى، لأن احنا يمكن لقينا إن كتير من العمل التنموي بيتم كلنا بنجتهد، كلنا يمكن عندنا نفس النوايا، كلنا عندنا نفس التوجهات، ولكن التنمية زي أي مجال آخر هي علم. وبالتالي حرصنا جدا كمؤسسة يمكن إن احنا نعمل حاجتين، أولاً إن احنا ننمي قدراتنا داخلياً في التعلم وفي ازاي ان احنا نبقى بنجمع البيانات، بنرصد البيانات بما ان احنا عندنا مشروعات كتير بتتم على ارض الواقع، وان احنا نبقى بننشر هذه البيانات بكل شفافيه من اجل التعلم مع شركائنا من الجمعيات الاهليه، شركائنا من الاكاديميين والجامعات، وشركائنا في القطاع الحكومي. ده اولا. ثانيا على ان احنا نبقى يمكن كمان بنساهم في وجود كوادر. انا فخوره جدا بوجود كتير من الباحثين، بعضهم معانا النهارده اكيد حضراتكم هتتعرفوا عليهم، لكن دكتور راجي اسعد بالذات بشكره لان دكتور راجي يمكن كان معانا في بدايه الرحله، وكذلك معمل عبد اللطيف جميل، بكل زملائنا من معمل عبد اللطيف جميل لان هم برضه كانوا مساندين بشكل كبير جدا لرحله مؤسسه ساويرس انها تبني هذه القدرات. وبالتالي كمان بدانا ندعم طلبه مصريين انهم يحصلوا على ماجستير في التنميه، وان شاء الله نامل ان احنا نبقى بنتوسع في ده، لان هذه الكوادر بترجع وتقدر انها تساعدنا كلنا، يعني مش فقط مؤسسه ساويرس، مش محتاجين يرجعوا لمؤسسه ساويرس ولكن يرجعوا للعمل التنموي بالشكل العلمي. فيمكن النهارده بالنسبه لي حدث مهم لان هو بيؤكد حرصنا كمؤسسه على ان احنا نبقى بنعمل العمل اللي احنا اكيد مهتمين جدا بيه، وهو الاوبجيكتيف يمكن الرئيسي المؤسسه والهدف الرئيسي هو دعم الفئات الغير مقتدره، ولكن الهدف الاخر لمؤسسه ساويرس هو ان احنا نبقى بنعمل ده باحسن شكل ممكن، باحسن استخدام لكل الامكانيات المتاحه، وان احنا نبقى بنتعلم من حضراتكم وبنتعلم مع حضراتكم. فأيام بشكر كل الزملاء من بنك الطعام المصري، من إفري، من مؤسسة ساويرس، أكيد يعني وزارة التضامن الاجتماعي احنا دايما بنتشرف بوجودها معانا وبوجود بالذات دكتورة نبيل القباش، وأمل إن النهارده تكون يعني جلسة ثرية للجميع. بشكر حضراتكم على وجودكم، وأدي الكلمة لنائب الوزير وزير الاتصالات المصرية الدكتور خالد العطار. اتفضل.
من هذه الوزاره ويمكن حالاتنا جايين في نفس اليوم ومع بعض تقريبا كل اسبوع مع فريق العمل عندها فريق متميز جدا. انا النهارده عايز ادي في عجاله جدا المنظومه المعلوماتيه اللي تقدر نعمل بيها الحمايه الاجتماعيه من خلال سياسات قائمه على الأدلة. نبتدي بأول نقطة اللي هي فكرة احنا ايه الفرضيات اللي عندنا اللي محتاجين نغيرها، محتاجين نبص عليها بشكل مختلف. أول فرضية احنا دايما بنعمل المنظومة بتاعت الحماية بناء على استقصاء رأي، بناء على سلسلة. هل أنا النهارده في الإيفيدنس بيست بوليسيز أقدر أعمل الكلام ده ولا لازم يبقى اشتغل في مجال ما يسمى بالبيج داتا؟ يعني انا عندي بيانات الدوله، والحقيقه مجهود التحول الرقمي الفتره اللي فاتت ان انا ازاي اخلي بيانات الدوله دي ثريه بحيث ان انت تقدر في البوليسي ميكنج او في عمليه اداره السياسات ان يبقى عندك البيان اللي تقدر تصمم بيه برنامج، ومش بس تصمم بيه برنامج، تصمم برنامج وتشوف تاثيره على الارض وتقدر تعمل كنترول دروس وتقدر تشوف الفرق بين برنامج في منطقه ومنطقه ثانيه ومن ثم تقدر تدير البرنامج. فاول فكره ازاي نتحول من السيرفيس الى السيرفيس بس مع بيج داتا، وبيج داتا بحيث انها تبقى ثاني قضيه في المعلوماتيه، هل الداتا اللي موجوده في الدوله موجوده بصوره قياسيه بحيث ان يمكن تبادلها ويمكن العمل بها؟ هل الاسم هو الاسم في كل قواعد البيانات؟ هل المكان هو المكان؟ هل الدخل هو الدخل؟ وهكذا. ومن ثم كان لازم يبقى فيه شغل جامد جدا على وضع منظومه قياسيه للبيانات. طيب نيجي دي تاني نقطه بنتكلم فيها. طب ثالث نقطه، هل المنظومات اللي احنا بنعملها بالطريقه القياسيه بتخدم وزاره القضاء فقط ولا بتخدم كل المتعاملين في المنظومه؟ ومن ثم كان لازم التصميم بتاعنا يبقى انه يحط كل الكي ستيك هولدرز في انتو كونسيدريشن. انا المنظومه فيها ريجوليتورز، فيها وضع سياسات، فيها منفذ للسياسات، وفي اكثر من سياسه تختص باكثر من شيء، يمكن في تموين، في اسكان، في صحه، في منظومه الدعم بصفه عامه اللي مع وزاره التضامن. فكان لازم نفكر في المنظومه من خلال ان انا ازاي احط كل الكي ستيك هولدرز. الكي ستيك هولدرز كمان فيهم الان جي اوز وفيهم ناس كتيره جدا، فكان لازم نحط ده. طيب جينا للنقطه اللي بعد كده، طب هل انا النهارده اقدر اتيح هذه البيانات؟ يعني انا اقدر احط البيانات دي بحيث ان انا اقدر اتيحها لحضراتكم عشان تبتدوا تصمموا البرامج وتشوفوا فعاليه البرامج؟ فالفكره كلها كان لازم يبقى في تغيير مؤسسي في هذا. ومن ثم في قانون دلوقتي موجود في وزاره العدل وان شاء الله هيطرح، اللي هو تصنيف وتبادل واتاحه البيانات. ليه؟ لان البيان القياسي، البيان المظبوط، البيان اللي يمكن تبادله، لازم في الاخر خالص اقدر اتيحه، مش بس اتيحه داخل الحكومه، لا ده انا اتيحه بالمحددات بتاعته اللي تخلي الناس كلها تقدر تشتغل بالبيانات. طيب نيجي نقول بقى النقطه اللي بعد كده، هل انا المنظومات بتاعتي لما باجي اماكنها انا بماكن ايه بالظبط؟ هل انا بماكن الاجراءات؟ وهل ده كفايه؟ ده بالطبع لا. انا لازم المنظومات بتاعتي تبقى شايفه الاثر. طيب الاثر ده بيقاس ازاي؟ الاثر ده لازم النهارده يبقى بيقاس بشكل علمي، ويمكن يسعدني ان احنا اشتغلنا مع الدكتور عبد الرحمن في وضع المنظومه العلميه. ما ينفعش قواعد البيانات زي زمان كده يقعد المحلل البرامج مع صاحب الشغلانه ويتفقوا مع بعض ايه اللي مطلوب، لا. البيج داتا بتعتمد على اني ازاي احط منظومه علميه سليمه. المنظومه العلميه دي بتشوف الاسره، بتشوف الانترفنشن، بتشوف التاثير على الاسره او على الانترفنشن دوت، وبتشوف الانترفنشنز دي كولكشن مع بعض كده هل بتؤدي الغرض ولا لا. ومن ثم برضه اشتغلنا مع الاكاديميز على اساس نحط قواعد البيانات بشكل علمي. خلاص عناصر البيانات بشكل علمي، ويمكن قدرنا ان احنا نعمل ويبقى بالتالي انا ما بعملش ميكنه في الاجراءات، انا بعمل ميكنه عشان في الاخر خالص اقدر اقيس الاثر. ليه؟ وانا بالتالي لما كل تفكيري ان انا اقيس الاثر، اقيس الاوتبوتس والاوتكمز والامباكتس، هقدر في الاخر خالص اميكن برضه كل الاجراءات، بس يبقى التفكير هو الاساس ان انا لازم المنظومه دي تبقى موريالي الامباكت. ده من الناحيه ازاي نقدر نخدم السوشيال ايكويتي او السوشيال بروتكشن من ناحيه المعلومات. عشان نقدر نعمل الكلام ده، هل انا كمان بقى نبص على البنيه المؤسسيه؟ القانون قلنا عليه، لكن في حاجه مهمه ثانيه، هو مين اللي هيشتغل على البيانات دي؟ هل احنا مؤهلين ان احنا نشتغل على البيانات دي؟ فاطلقنا ما يسمى بالسي دي او اكاديمي او تشيف داتا اوفيسر اكاديمي، على اساس ان احنا نخلق الكوادر اللي قادره تشتغل على كديتا ساينتست، يشتغلوا مع الساده الوزراء والساده صانعي القرار، بحيث ان هم يقدروا يساعدوهم. الاكاديمي ان شاء الله هتبتدي الشهر الجاي، واحنا مستهدفين حوالي 100 واحد، ان هم 100 بروفيشنال، عشان دول يبقوا جاهزين مش بس للقطاع الحكومي، لا للبلد كلها انه يقدروا يشتغلوا عليها. اخر حاجه عايز اقولها من الناحيه التكنولوجيه، المنظومات اللي بنتكلم عليها النهارده منظومات بتستدعي يعني محتاجه انفراستراكشر قويه جدا، وما يقدرش النهارده اي دوله انها تقدر تستحمل استثمارات الانفراستراكشر المطلوبه، لان احنا عندنا منظومات عملاقه، منها التامين الصحي، منها منظومه تكافل الكرامه، منها منظومه التموين. يعني ادي لحضراتكم مثال، مثلا في منظومه التموين او منظومه تكافل الكرامه، تعالى نتكلم عن منظومه التموين. لما عندي شبكه بيصرف فيها كل يوم الصبح 21 مليون بني ادم، اللي هي شبكه الخبز، او شبكه المعاشات، او شبكه، فاحنا عندنا منظومات اي تي كتيره جدا ومحتاجه مجهود جامد. كان لازم النهارده لحمايه هذه البيانات انا لازم اتحرك بالكلاود، لازم اتحرك على الحوسبه. بس وانا بتحرك على الحوسبه كان لازم نحط الاطر اللي تخليني يبقى عندي حمايه للبيانات واقدر اشتغل على الحوسبات القديمه. عشان في هذا الصدد عملنا مشروع ما يسمى اعاده هيكله التطبيقات الحكوميه، وشغالين فيه مع معالي الدكتوره نزين قباش ومع العديد من الوزراء عشان نحول هذا الحلم اللي احنا بنتكلم عليه الى حقيقه. بدانا التحليلات وشغالين مع منظومه متكامله من اساتذه الجامعه ومن التكنولوجيز، وطبعا بيقودنا الدكتوره نزين قباش بفريق العمل المتميز عندها. اتمنى في ال3 دقائق اللي فاتوا او ال5 دقائق اللي فاتوا ان انا اديكم فكره على ازاي نقدر نحول ايفيدنس بيست بوليسي. البيج داتا ده مش سيرفيز، بتكلم على سيستمز تو ميجر امباكتس، بتكلم على سيستمز تو مانج اوفر اول بوليسي بروسيسز، بتكلم على تكنولوجي قادره انها تستوعب، بتكلم على بيئه مؤسسيه قادره انها تساعد الدوله، بتكلم على بنيه او انتلكتشوال كابيتال يقدر ان هو يساعد حقيقي في التعامل مع البيانات والعمليات الخاصه بالبيانات. بشكر حضراتكم جدا جدا.
شكرا جدا دكتور خالد على الكلمه الطيبه. دلوقتي كلمه معالي وزيره دكتور نبيل طبيعي في وزاره التضامن الاجتماعي. اهلا بحضرتك دكتور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يعني الحقيقه النهارده لقاء عزيز جدا عليا، بقول لحضراتكم ليه بعد ما يعني ازيد شرفا وفخرا بزمالتي ووجودي في هذا المؤتمر. برحب طبعا بزملائي الاعزاء الدكتور خلال العطار نائب وزير الاتصالات، الحقيقه ليه فضل كبير في التحول الرقمي لوزاره التضامن الاجتماعي، ودايما بقول له كده، بس هو عشان راجل طيب ومتواضع ما بيعترفش بده، لكن احنا بنعترف بيه مع نفسنا. ايضا الدكتور ابراهيم العشماوي نائب وزير التموين، يعني الاستاذه نوره سليم طبعا شهادتي فيها مجروحه جدا، لاننا النهارده بنشرف نكون موجودين مع مؤسستين مجتمع مدني قويتين كنا بنحلم بيهم طول عمرنا اللي شغالين في التنميه، ان يكون عندنا مؤسسات قائمه على دراسات علميه بتتابع شغلها ريزلتس بيزد، مؤسسات مش معتمده فقط على مصادر تمويل خارجيه، فيها جزء كبير من التوليد او تعبئه الموارد المحليه والاستثمار في الكابيتال بتاعها او راس المال بتاعها عشان تكون مؤسسات مجتمع مدني قويه، ومنها طبعا مؤسسه ساويرس. والحقيقه نورا كان ليها دخل كبير في نهضه مؤسسه ساويرس للتنميه الاجتماعيه وكلنا نعلم ذلك طبعا، بالاضافه الى سابقيها، لكن هي اكيد حطت لمسات قويه جدا من خلال دراساتها وخبراتها. بنك الطعام المصري طبعا يعني برضه من الجمعيات اللي كان ليها سبق شديد في موضوع من اهم الموضوعات اللي بيقابلها المجتمع المصري، وقد ايه كانت داخله في موضوع تنموي ايضا باكتفاء ذاتي جمع بين التغذيه والامن الغذائي ودراسات الفقر والاستهداف. فيعني طبعا انا موجود معانا هو الدكتور لبيب، اهلا وسهلا، لكن برحب بزملائي في غيابهم. طبعا انا النهارده يعني دايما بقول ندي الحق لاصحاب واصحاب العلم والفكر واساتذه العلم في هذا المجال والاحصاء اللي احنا اتعلمنا منهم وبنعتبرهم اساتذه، الدكتور ماجد عثمان والدكتور راجي اسعد والدكتوره هانيه، قد ايه واحنا يعني في بدايه شغلنا في التنميه هم بداوا بدري، بس بداوا ده على طول على البحوث والاحصاءات اللي احنا كنا بنستعين بيها واللي دلوقتي اصبحت اساس في شغلنا. طبعا اكيد المعهد الدولي لبحوث سياسات الغذاء او التغذيه، وهو شريك معانا اصيل من حوالي 7 سنوات لما كان بيساهم، هو كان الاساس بالشراكه مع البنك الدولي ووزاره التضامن الاجتماعي ان هو يعمل امباكت اسسمنت او دراسات اثر لتكافل الكرامه، ودخل معانا في بيس لاين ايفالويشن وبعدين بعد كده بروسيس ايفالويشن وفي امباكت ايفالويشن، وبدا معانا كمان في برنامج فرصه، وهو من يعني المعاهد او المراكز البحثيه المتميزه في هذا المجال، بالاضافه الى معمل عبد اللطيف جميل. طبعا عبد الرحمن هو منتشر في كل حته، يعني هو متعدد الانتماءات، فخلي بالكم لان ده عميل متعدد. يعني هنلاقيه في الجامعه الامريكيه، هنلاقيه في معمل عبد اللطيف جميل، هنلاقيه في جي بال، في مؤسسه ساويرس مع وزاره الاتصالات، فخلي بالكم منه. طبعا يعني ايضا برحب طبعا بزملائي الدكتور محمد كرماني والجلسات. يسعدني ويشرفني يكون جزء من هذا الهدف اللي بيستعرض موضوع صنع السياسات القائمه على الادله evidence based policies. وانا فاكره وانا في يونيسيف زمان كنا موجودين في ماركتنج ايفالويشن وسوشيال بوليسيز، وكان في ارتباط شديد بين السياسات الاجتماعيه والايفيدنس بيست. السياسات الاجتماعيه سياسات حيه متغيره ديناميكيه، ولا يجوز ان هي تبقى دراسات ثابته، فلازم تبقى دراسات حيه مبنيه على ادله وعلى تغيرات، ويعني بحث عمليه بحثيه دائمه مع المجتمع، مش بس على البرايمري داتا لكن كمان السكندري داتا، لان في ابحاث بتطلع كل سنتين، في ابحاث تطلع كل 10، لكن الحقيقه احنا التفاعل الدائم مع الميدان مهم جدا. وانا باشرف النهارده يكون موجودين معايا زملائي الاعزاء جدا وشركائي مش زملائي بس في تكافل وكرامه من وزاره التضامن، الاستاذ رأفت شفيق، الباشمهندسه امل حلمي، وايضا الاستاذ حسين، بالاضافه الى زملائي في الاعلام شيرين ومحمد عبد المنعم. لكن الحقيقه شركاء تكافل وكرامه ده احنا زي ما عبد الرحمن بيقول طبخنا النهارده، بيقول بقالنا كتير بنطبخ هذا اللقاء، فانا يعني تقريبا عبد الرحمن وانها مع ان احنا بنتكلم على التغذيه فاتكلم على الطبخ، فالحقيقه برضه دول طبخوا معانا برنامج تكافل وكرامه. احنا النهارده بنتكلم على الايفيدنس بيس بوليسيز في وقت مصر بتتحول فيه رقميا، والايفيدنس بيس بوليسيز ما ينفعش تتعمل، ما ينفعش نتكلم على اي استهداف او حوكمه دون ميكنه. فده اساس علشان نقدر نتابع بما يحدث في الميدان، وبنتكلم على امباكت اسسمنت، هل فعلا الدعم او المزايا الاجتماعيه الوارده بتذهب الى مستحقيها ام لا؟ فده النقطه بتاعت التارجتنج او الاستهداف مهم قوي ان احنا نطرحه كجزء من دراسات الفقر والتغذيه في آن واحد. والمهم قوي اللي الدوله كلها بتتكلم عنه دلوقتي الانفستمنت ان هيومن كابيتال او الاستثمار في البشر. الاستثمار في البشر ده مش كلام عادي، اكيد كلكم دارسين وعارفين وايديكم في الشغل ان بنتكلم على قضايا طفوله وقضايا مركبه جدا. قضيه التغذيه هي قضيه تنمويه، مش مساله ناس بتاكل وتشرب، هي مربوطه بصحه الام والطفل، مربوطه بالمستوى الادراكي والمعرفي والتعليمي للاطفال، مربوطه بعوامل بيئيه وبدراسات البيئه، مربوطه بالزراعه، مربوطه بالاكتفاء الذاتي، مربوطه بالحد من الفقر. فالحقيقه يعني هي قضيه مركبه ولا تقتصر على انها مجرد الولاد تاكل كويس ولا لا، لانها قضيه حقيقه تداعياتها مش هتظهر دلوقتي، تداعياتها مش بس صحيه، تداعياتها اقتصاديه عميقه. علشان كده مهم قوي ان احنا كمان نعمل فوركاستنج، مش بس بندرس الافيدنس بيس بوليسيز دلوقتي، ولكن بنعمل دراسات تنبؤ اثر هذا على الاقتصاد المصري او على نوعيه الغذاء في مصر ازاي هتكون. بنتكلم في وقت نعلم تماما ان احنا بنمر بعفره اقتصاديه بتؤثر مش بس على نوع التغذيه ولكن على الامن الغذائي. فالنهارده وزاره التضامن ايه دخلها دوت؟ وزاره التضامن معنيه بالفئات الاولى بالرعايه والاسر تحت خط الفقر والفقيره، اللي كل يعني مشكلات التنميه بتلقي بعبائها على الفئات اللي بتخدمها وزاره التضامن الاجتماعي، وكاننا محامي الفقراء، وكاننا مراقبين على جوده حياته. في علاقه مش بس ان التغذيه هي القضاء على الجوع هو الهدف الثاني من اهداف التنميه المستدامه، ده مش سيمانتكس بنتكلم عنه نقول علاقه دوت باهداف التنميه المستدامه هو الهدف الثاني، لا هو اهداف التنميه المستدامه ليها مردود محلي قوي جدا، هي ليها علاقه شديده بالفقر، لان الفقراء ما بياخدوش تغذيه بالقدر الكافي او بالجوده السليمه، وبالتالي قد يستمروا في فقرهم ويتحولوا الى توريث للفقر. علشان كده مهم قوي احنا كوزاره التضامن الاجتماعي احنا بنربط بسياسات الحمايه الاجتماعيه المتكامله وليس الدعم النقدي الاصم، والا كنا انا اسفه في الكلمه كاننا بنحط شويه فلوس ونمشي. لا، هي الهدف حمايه اجتماعيه متكامله، ومش المفروض اللي ياخد برامج الدعم يستمر فيها، لان بنتكلم على ان احنا نازلين باراشوت، بنعمل ازمه اقتصاديه، وبعدين بنعمل ترانزيشن، وبعدين بنعمل جراديويشن، وبعدين بنعمل امباورمنت. فاذا كان السلسله دي مش في طريقها يبقى احنا بنشتغل احسان مش حمايه اجتماعيه. الحمايه الاجتماعيه الحقيقيه هي ان انا ادعم هذه الاسر علشان عندها طوارئ، وبعدين امكنها حثيثا وتدريجيا حتى يتم نقلها من هذا الفقر المدقع الى حتى فقر، وبعدين الى فوق خط الفقر، بعدين امكنها وبعدين اخليها عنصر مشارك. وده مش اكيد بيتحقق، يعني لا تستطيع ان تقوم به وزاره وحيده. عشان كده احنا بنتعاون مع التموين ومع الصحه ومع التعليم ومع وزارات عديده قائمه على دوت. المجتمع المدني شريك اساسي في هذا الموضوع. فاحنا بنتكلم على ان ما بنقتصرش فقط على الدعم النقدي، على جوده الحياه اللي فيها تغذيه واللي فيها صحه وتعليم واللي فيها ميه شرب واللي فيها صرف صحي واللي فيها ثقافه وحمايه من العنف، فهي واللي فيها نوعيه السكن اللي بيسكن فيه المواطنين. عندنا شويه احصاء شديده، احنا عارفين ان الDHS الاخير اشار الى ارتفاع معدلات الانيميا من 26 الى 40%، وده مؤشر خطير جدا. ده قبل ما كنا بنتكلم على الظروف الاقتصاديه. فاحنا امام مشكله كبيره، الدوله لن تستطيع الوفاء او الرد على هذه المشكلات وحدها بمنتهى الشفافيه. فلازم احنا نبحث عن حلول بديله ونشوف ما يمكن ان يتعمل بسمارت سوليوشنز. كمان معدل انتشار النقص التغذوي عام 21 ارتفع الى 9.8، سنه 20 كان 9.3، سنه 19 كان 8، فاذا الترند بيشير الى ارتفاع. طبعا اذا كنا بنتكلم على ان وزاره التضامن عشان كده بتشتغل اكتر على ال1000 يوم الاولى في حياه الطفل، وكتير بيسالوني هو انتوا مالكم بصحه الام والطفل؟ ما هو صحه الام والطفل لو استمرت كده هيفضلوا عندنا في تكافل وكرامه الى الابد، والمفروض ان احنا عيننا دلوقتي على الانكلوجن وبعدين على الجراديويشن. لكن لو مش كده هنتحول الى احنا كنا 1.6 مليون اسره، وصلنا اول خالص مكان ضمان اجتماعي، دلوقتي بقينا 2.5 3.6 3.8 4 4.6، احنا ما يقرب من 5 مليون اسره. فاكيد اموال تكافل وكرامه مش هي اللي هتتسبب في ان انا ارفع حده نقص الغذاء لدى الاطفال، لان مش بس احنا بنتكلم على لو كنا بنتكلم على يعني ايه سوء التغذيه، فهي مربوطه بعوامل عده، مربوطه بالانيميا، بالنحافه، بالهزال، بنقص المعادن الاساسيه. فهو موضوع علشان كده دايما اللي بيقيس بيقيسها انا مش فاكره اسمه ايه، حاجه ماتريكس، لكن هي بتبقى مش بس بيسال الاسره، ده بيوزن الاطفال وبيشوف اسمها ايه. هي دي بالظبط. يعني يمكن زملائي المتخصصين اكتر مني، بالاضافه الى معدلات النحافه اللي وصلت تقريبا ل 6.8%. الاطفال اللي بيعانوا طبعا من سوء تغذيه عرضه اكتر ان هم يقودوا حياه يعني فقيره، بالاضافه الى الامهات. علشان كده وزاره التضامن الاجتماعي شرعت في تنفيذ برنامج ال1000 يوم الاولى في حياه الطفل او ال1000 يوم الذهبيه، وما كناش بندي في تكافل وكرامه دعم نقدي تحت سن 6 سنين، اصبحنا بندي تحت مبلغ تحت سن 6 سنين لهذا الغرض خصيصا. الامن الغذائي بيتحقق بالافيلابيلتي، ان هو يكون في توافر امن غذائي، وان انا اقدر اوصل الاكسسبيلتي باليوتيلايزيشن او الاستخدام. فالنهارده بنتحدث مع ارتفاع الاسعار على توافر المواد الغذائيه، عشان كده اول حاجه الحكومه مركزه عليها على يعني توافر المحاصيل او المنتجات الاساسيه في مصر. الحمد لله لغايه دلوقتي موجوده، لكن الاكسسبيلتي او اليوتيلايزيشن هي دي المفروض نشتغل عليها. هل الناس هتقدر تفي بالموضوعات الاساسيه؟ هل نعمل باكج بره الصندوق عشان نعمل زي زمان ما كنا بنشتغل في التنميه ال7 حبوب اللي نقدر نطحنهم مع بعض ونغذي الاطفال؟ فمحتاجه ده كمان الحقيقه الدراسات اكيد هتقول لنا عليها. وزاره التضامن الاجتماعي مع المعهد الدولي لبحوث السياسات الغذائيه الحقيقه يعني هي مؤسسه بحثيه مستقله، لكن كان لنا شرف الشراكه معاها في ان احنا نعمل تقييم بالغ الدقه لقياس الاثار المتوسطه المدى وطويله المدى للمستفيدين من تكافل وكرامه. قد ايه المستفيدين من تكافل وكرامه استفادوا او اثر على التغذيه لديهم. وفعلا البرنامج حصل يعني افاد بنتائج بتقول ان اللي بياخد هذه الموارد بيحسن الحزمه الغذائيه بتاعته. يعني مثلا بيقول ايه، اصل بدانا ناكل فاكهه، او احنا بقينا نروح للدكتور للطبيب اقل. فاذا لو النهارده بنشوف ان في منتجات قد تغيب عن الاسره ما يمكن عمله، علشان كده الامباكت مهم قوي قوي. الحقيقه ان التحويلات النقديه سمحت للاسر بزياده استهلاكها بنسبه 8.5% تقريبا مقارنه باللي مش مستفيدين. يعني بيستهلكوا غذاء اكتر من اللي مش مستفيدين، وان الاسر الفقيره استخدمت الموارد في تحسين نظامها الغذائي بالاضافه الى مصروفات التعليم. يعني اصبح لدى الاسر فرصه اكبر طبعا لان هي يكون عندها وفره ماديه، خاصه سياده الرئيس يعني مشكورا وجه بزياده موارد تكافل وكرامه بنسبه 25% لحرص الدوله على يعني بقاء ونهضه برامج الحمايه الاجتماعيه حتى في الظروف الاقتصاديه الصعبه. بتستمر شراكتنا مع الFP في المهمه الموكله اليهم لتحليل البيانات. احنا عندنا داتا بيس قويه جدا ان هي اذا كنا بندي 5 مليون اسره اللي هم تقريبا 20 مليون فرد، فاحنا لدينا في قاعده بياناتنا 10.5 او 10.4 مليون اسره، بما يفيد بحوالي 38 مليون مواطن. فبنتكلم على اكثر من ثلث الجمهوريه هم الثلث اللي بيتركز في المشكلات. فاذا احنا نقدر نستخدم هذه الداتا سواء البيج داتا اناليسيز او الميتا داتا اناليسيز علشان نقدر نوصل فيه لبعض السياسات التي نستطيع ان نوصي بها لصناع ومتخذي القرار علشان نقدر نوصل لده. الحقيقه النتائج دي ساعدتنا ان احنا نعدل في برامجنا وان احنا ننزل ببرامج اخرى موازيه، لان هي مش غذاء البطون فقط ولكن غذاء العقول، لان الناس ليس لديها الوعي الكافي بسبل الغذاء السليمه اللي تقدر توصل بيها باكثر الطرق ترشيدا. يعني ازاي اصرف اقل واكل احسن، هي ايه المواد الغذائيه اللي مفيده ليا اللي اقدر اشتغل عليها في حدود قدراتي. فمساله الوعي ومساله المعرفه مهمه جدا، لان غني عن الذكر ان كثير من هذه الاسر ليس لديه تلك المعلومات بالقدر الكافي. علشان كده سياده الرئيس وجه ان احنا نزود الرائدات الاجتماعيات من 2500 رائده الى 15 و20 الف رائده. فاحنا ممكن نساعد كمان في جمع البيانات، بعض البيانات اللي حضراتكم عايزينها، لان الرائدات دي بتدخل المنازل. احنا بنعمل حاجه اسمها مرصد اسري. المرصد الاسره ده الرائده بتجيب فيه استماره طويله عريضه بتكررها 3 مرات في السنه عشان نقدر نشوف التغير في الاتجاهات، التغير في السلوكيات. ده مهم قوي ان احنا نعرفه. الحقيقه احنا يعني يمكن النهارده بننفق على برامج الحمايه الاجتماعيه، مش هقول في مصر كلها، هقول في وزاره التضامن فقط 31 مليار، بالاضافه الى ما يقرب من 100 مليار للتموين، بالاضافه الى موضوعات اخرى. لكن طبعا في حمايه اجتماعيه بتتخطى النص تريليون في جمهوريه مصر العربيه، لكن اللي هو يفوق ال 500 وشويه مليار جنيه مصري. هتكلم بس على ما يخص الفئه الادنى ل 20% من السكان اللي هي الغذاء وتكافل الكرامه. الباقي بقى اسكان اجتماعي، تنميه الصادرات، كل ده مهم، لكن النوعين الدعم اللي بيصبوا في صالح الاكثر فقرا هو التكافل الكرامه والتموين. فاذا دول تقريبا بياخدوا ثلث او حوالي مثلا 28% من اجمالي برامج الحمايه الاجتماعيه في مصر. فاعتقد ان ده يستدعي دراسته وقياس اثره بشكل مستمر، مع تصنيف ما بين الريف والحضر وما بين المناطق الصحراويه اللي ما فيهاش بتتميز بغذاء معين، بكمان الفئات العمريه المختلفه، خاصه الاطفال تحت سن 4 سنوات اللي بتتشكل فيهم ما يقرب من 60% من بنيته العقليه. فاحنا بنتكلم في سنوات غاليه جدا وثمينه جدا، فيجب ان نسارع جميعا في معالجه هذه المشكلات. لن نستطيع معالجه اي حاجه الا لو فقدنا بيانات ودراسات واحصاءات بيقوم بيها اساتذتنا الاعزاء واللي ذكرت منهم النهارده، وهناك الكثيرين منهم. في الاخر يعني انا بتشرف دايما ان اكون موجوده مع المجتمع المدني، بتشرف اني اساهم في الابحاث لان انا اصلا باحثه، واني اكون موجوده طبعا مع زملائي في الحكومه. لكن هي الشراكه ديت مع اهل العلم واهل الميدان واهل السياسات هي مهمه جدا عشان نقدر نتحرك لقدام. لكن كل الشكر والتقدير لكل المؤسسات الشريكه، وايضا للشركاء اللي موجودين يعني فرد فرد. احنا مشتاقين الى هذه النوعيه من الابحاث. انا بحاول اخليها في وزاره التضامن موجوده بشكل مستمر، مش بس للدعم النقدي للايتام، علشان كده هتلاقوا بعض الحاجات بتفرقع في وشي احيانا، لكن لازم نفتح الصناديق السوداء ونطلعها بمنتهى الشفافيه ونتعرض ليها بمنتهى الجرأه السياسيه عشان نقدر ناخد اذا كنا فعلا نبتغي تغيير حقيقي، وهو ده اصل التنميه. فعيب علينا ان نشتغل فيها وما نحاولش نعمل تغيير حتى لو فتفوته. فبشكركم، ويعني بتمنى لكم ان شاء الله لقاء ناجح وموفق، واكيد هيبقى موفق لان اللي موجودين اهل علم، اهل صدق، اهل شغف، فان شاء الله هتبقى النتيجه رائعه. شكرا جزيلا.
شكرا جزيلا معالي الوزيرة نجيب باش. استاذنك يا دكتور لو ينفع ناخد صورة سريعة جدا على الستيج مع المهندسين. هم منتظرين حضرتك هم يعني جايين في الطريق.
البانر ولا
شكرا مرة أخرى لمعالي الوزيرة نجيب باش، دكتور خلال العطار، المهندسة مراسلين، شكر موصول لأستاذ محسن سرحان. احنا هناخد 5 دقايق استراحة ونبدأ الجلسة الجاية إن شاء الله. استاذن المتحدثين ان هم يبقوا موجودين معانا على الستيج. Yvonne, can you please come to the stage? Dr. Rajai. أنا آسفة جدا. دكتور رجاء أسعد. دكتور أحمد. أستاذنا. شكرا جدا. هنبدأ الجلسة خلاص. Sandra, as well, please, can you come to the stage? Thank you. شكرا جدا للحضور واسفه المره الرابعه ان احنا اتاخرنا. هنبدا خلاص الجلسه الثانيه استاذ عبد الرحمن نبدا الجلسه ونقدم المتحدثين. شكرا.
Thanks, Alina. Thank you so much, everyone. Now we are turning into English. So, thanks again for coming today, for making the time and for joining us in our very special event to discuss different results and evidence in relation to social protection. So the process of evidence generation through rigorous scientific methods, and after that the process of publishing or disseminating these results in the forms of scientific papers, reports, or even seminars like today. This evidence process is very long, quite expensive, and require a lot of skills to produce, from local staff to principal investigators. A whole team works to the end of producing the most accurate and relevant results. Today, we are gathered to witness the post-production. You could also say advocacy for the most important interventions in Egypt in relation to social protection. Today, we will be discussing and sharing results from Bad Amal program, General Feeding program, Takaful al-Ikrama, as well as Forza. Why? That basically we are coming today to exchange knowledge, to produce the best social protection policies, hopefully to work all together to measure maximizing the impact of our work. I'll stop here and I will start by introducing Dr. Kebron Abai, the Egypt Country Program Leader, FP. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So I'm back again. In this presentation, I will try to show you that we have started some of the work. We have started working some of the stuff that we were talking in the morning, and we have projects ongoing on the ground, impact projects ongoing on the ground, and I'm going to present one case that relates to the Egyptian Food Bank General Feeding Program. This is an impact evaluation that we are doing together with our partners. Again, this is what we have so far is the baseline and midline results when we are waiting for an inline survey to come soon. So what we have is just the first phase findings. And of course, I'm presenting on behalf of my team, who are distributed all over. So to motivate this, we know that despite some of the important progress in hunger, a significant share of the world population still lives or suffers from some form of food insecurity and malnutrition. And indeed, recent evaluations suggest that the United Nations 2030 agenda of sustainable development goal to end hunger may not be achieved in the remaining 3 years, as you can see from the figure. where you can see from the figure, globally, the share of people undernourished was declining up until 2014-15, but you can see that it has now peaked again in 2019, starting from 2019 and 2020 and 2021. And this obviously relates to some of the recurring crises we are facing. And this suggests that there is definitely a significant reversal in our progress toward ending hunger. And of course, Egypt is not an island, Egypt is not spared from some of the recurring global crises. And as you can see from the figure, since the outbreak of the food inflation, since the outbreak of the Russian-Ukraine crisis, you can see that food inflation tripled from about 20% to 60% now. This generates significant burden to our social protection system, and as you can imagine, in a normal circumstance, we expect social protection programs to provide what we call basic needs to households. But during a crisis, we also these programs are burdened not only to provide basic needs, but also to protect households from the adverse impact of the shocks. So, what are we evaluating here? We are evaluating Egyptian Food Bank's General Feeding Program. We call it GFP, and the GFP provides monthly food boxes to ultra-poor households. And the ultra-poor households, or GFP beneficiaries for this program, are the ones that are not able to secure their food, which according to CAPMA's 2020 census make up about 4.5% of the Egyptian population. And the Egyptian Food Bank uses community-based organizations, or CBOs, as recruiting partners. And after that, CBOs recruit the potential beneficiaries. There is an additional screening by the AFB to issue compliance with eligibility requirements, including being family-headed household and reporting insufficient income. So, what are we evaluating? We are evaluating an intervention that is aiming to redesign the GFP, or the food boxes that are being delivered to households. And these food boxes are being redesigned to make them more, to include more diverse and nutrient-dense food items. And this is obviously consistent with some of the nutrition challenges we're facing, including the ones that Dr. Nilin was mentioning. This is also being accompanied by a complementary awareness campaign and program to enhance and promote healthy eating habits and practices. And in this study, we are interested to evaluate the absolute and related impact of the newly designed food box. And as you can imagine, we are evaluating this in a context where households are facing significant inflation. And that makes it quite relevant both to policy and to our knowledge. So we are interested to quantify potential impacts on households' dietary diversity, experience of food insecurity, nutritional intake, and other outcomes. So here are the boxes. This is the first one, is the all box. It includes 2 kilos of sugar, some white bean, and other food items. The new box is a much more diversified box, and it has some more nutrient-dense food items, including milk, meat, and legumes. So what we're trying to understand and quantify the impact of the new box as well as the old box. In terms of experimental design, the intervention follow what we call a cluster randomized approach, or cluster randomization, where we randomize the intervention at the village level. And for that purpose, we start with a complete list of villages from the census, and then we stratify them into across the governorates and then across the rural and urban areas, and we randomly select about 250 communities, and we randomly assign them into 5 treatment arms. And then we drop and replace the communities with no partner community-based organization, and those with very few potential beneficiaries. In terms of timeline, we have this timeline where we can see that we started the baseline data collection sometime in late August, and it ran into September and October, and then the intervention was started in November. So we have 5 arms in the intervention. So 5 treatment arms, where the first arm is just offering the new box, and then the second arm offers new box plus some messaging. And then we have another arm that offers simply the old box, and then we have another arm that offers simply messaging. And then we collected baseline midline data in March, and we only collected baseline midline data on 3 arms. And I'm going only to talk about this treatment arm, the 3 arms. And we will have an inline survey that's coming and revisiting the remaining treatment arms. So, results. So our first result relates to household dietary diversity. And what you can see from these figures is the control group experienced significant deterioration in dietary diversity, and this is intuitive, obviously. And those who received the box, on the other hand, were significantly protected. And you can see the people or the households who received the new box had experienced or reported an increase in dietary diversity. While on the other hand, you can see that the control group experienced significant deterioration in dietary diversity. Here is another outcome, which is self-reported food insecurity experience score, and this is the raw score of households' experience, self-reported experience of food insecurity, and you can see that again, the control group households experienced significant increase in food insecurity experience, but you can see that the new box protected households, and households in the new box reported significantly lower experience of food insecurity. So this is obviously consistent with the challenging circumstances and inflationary pressure that households are experiencing. So then we asked ourselves, could there be differential impact of this intervention across different households, particularly across those beneficiaries who might be receiving some benefit from the Tamam program and others who may not be receiving. And what you can clearly see here is the protective role of the new box, or the boxes are much higher in context or across households who are not receiving the Tamam benefit. And this is obviously intuitive because you can see that in the second figure you can see that among those households who are not receiving any benefit from the Tamam program, you can see that they experienced about a reduction in dietary diversity by 1 food group, and this is obviously a big number. On the other hand, you can see that the new box significantly increased dietary diversity, more so for those households who are not receiving any benefits. We interpret this as an evidence that this program can be a complementary program, or can support complementary services or support to households. For those interested in more quantitative numbers, we also estimated the impact using our impact evaluation matrix. And what we see in this table is in the first column, you see that receiving any box, whether it's a new or old box, increases dietary diversity. But you also see in the second column that the new box is more effective than the old box. And then in the remaining outcomes, you also see that the new box has significantly increased the consumption of nutrient-dense food items, including milk, meat, dates, and nuts, which are part of the new box. And then here also you see the heterogeneous treatment effect I was referring, and you can see that in the first 2 columns, the results are for those households who are benefiting from the Tamam program, and the remaining 2 columns are for those households who are not receiving the Tamam benefits. And what you can clearly see is the fourth column shows you that the new box increases dietary diversity for those who are not benefiting from the Tamam program by 1.3 diet food groups, and that's That's quite a big number. Finally, we asked households their preference for a food box or an equivalent cash transfer, because we want to understand how preference for different food groups and for different delivery mechanisms are evolving. And what we see is, you can see that in the baseline, the control and treatment group households have had similar preference for in-kind transfer. But after the baseline, in the midline, you see that households reported significant preference for the food boxes, and that's the in-kind transfer. And this is intuitive because in the context of an inflationary pressure, households are likely to prefer in-kind transfer over cash transfer. And more so for those households who received the new box, or most for those who have experience in the new box and the content of the box. We interpret this evidence as an evidence that the food boxes have been well received, and they are obviously preferred. So to conclude, what we find is, in the absence of food subsidy or any intervention, we see that dietary diversity and food security deteriorated in the midline survey, and this is obviously intuitive given the inflationary pressure we are experiencing. However, we see that the food boxes did play protective roles. Indeed, what we see is the new box increased the dietary diversity and reduced food insecurity experience. And the protective role of the new box, or the food boxes, are more strong for those who are not receiving amount reduction. This has important implications for targeting. And we also see that preference for in-kind food box has significantly so that's all. I would like to thank and appreciate our partners, mainly the Sawiris Foundation who funded this project, and also the Egyptian Food Bank, who have been crucial in implementing this intervention. Thank you very much, and I'm now around to
Thank you so much, Dr. Kepler, for your presentation, for sharing these amazing results. It's very interesting to see finally scientific evidence that measures the impact of providing food boxes. Finally, we can clearly say that providing food boxes has a significant impact, and they can positively improve the protection for poor households. Now, I think everyone is eager and would like to know more details about the impact evaluation for FORSA and scaffolding programs. So now we'll be listening to Dr. Sekandar, who will be sharing more results about FORSA and the CAFA Dikrama impact evaluation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rahman, and thank you all for coming. So I'm going to be talking a bit about some of the history of the impact evaluations that IFPRI has been working on with the Ministry of Social Solidarity, TKAFLA and Krama, and now FORSA. So to kind of give an overview, because there's a lot of different parts here, there is two main impact evaluations of the TKAFLA and Krama cash transfer program, focused on the TKAFL element of that, both using the regression discontinuity approach. The first round was in 2017 and the second round in 2022. We also have ongoing work and past work looking at the targeting and ongoing work looking at the heterogeneity analysis. Both of these are using the administrative data, as was pointed out earlier today. That's a really valuable source also beyond the surveys that you can use for impact evaluation. And then the other main activity that we're doing, and this is also still ongoing, but we're happy to share that so that you know that it's something that's ongoing, and we can share experiences with other researchers, is the FORSA evaluation, for which we conducted the baseline in 2022. And we appreciate for these different evaluations major support from the USAID evaluating impact and building capacity project, the World Bank, and one CG initiative. National policies and strategies. So the two evaluations that we've done with the CAFL are a little bit different from the randomized controlled trial that's more popularly used. The really benefit of regression discontinuity approach is that we're able to measure the impact of a program without having to conduct a baseline and without having to conduct a control group. So that makes this approach ideal for rigorous evaluation. It's still very restricted scientifically, and we're able to do that in a context where we've got an ongoing large national program without having to do a dedicated pilot. So the diagram is showing you just a basic intuition here of what we do. Because there is a strict cutoff for the capital program or the PMT score that determines whether you're eligible or not, we can't just compare people who are capital beneficiaries to people who are non-capital beneficiaries. Because we know that the capital beneficiaries are on average poor, and all of their household outcomes are going to be worse than somebody who is excluded from the program because they're well off already. But we can look right in the neighborhood of the cutoff. And somebody who is just barely eligible from the program versus somebody who is just barely not eligible from the program, those two households are comparable. And by comparing them, one that got the program just barely and one that missed just barely on the program, we can say what the impact of the program is, how households end up using those cash transfers. There's a slight disadvantage to this approach, which is that it measures the local average treatment effect, which means we're measuring the impact on households that are near the threshold. And it could be that the total impacts are larger for households that are even more poor, but it's more difficult to measure that using this RD approach. So because of that, this evaluation work using the RD approach was supplemented in 2018 by a qualitative evaluation, and now currently by ongoing heterogeneity analysis using administrative data. So basically, we're really relying on the fact that there's this sharp jump in eligibility between people who are just below and just above the cutoff. And this was a bit easier to do in 2017 than it has been in 2022. Because in 2017, we were measuring households that have only been in the program for about a year. Now, coming back in 2022, it's really interesting because we're measuring the impacts on households that have been in the program for more than 5 years. It's a little bit more difficult to see that clean cutoff, though. If you look at the figures, the jump in the concentrations above and below the cutoff, it's not as big of a jump. And that means that we have to have a narrower set of households in order to maximize the statistical power. So mostly I'm going to turn back to talking about the 2017 results because this is something that's already kind of gone through the policy cycle. Back in 2017, 2018, when we kind of published the evaluation report, we showed, as Dr. Namin mentioned earlier this morning, that there was a significant impact on total consumption of 8.4%, and specifically food spending increased by 8.9%. We also had, and that's really a very respectable result compared to international experience. The first figure here is showing that the impact on consumption in percentage terms from to capital compared to other really major nationally regarded cash transfer programs such as Bolsa Familia in Brazil. And it's really right in the average range. Specifically, it's also really interesting, especially today when we're talking about nutrition impacts, that impact on consumption, a lot of it was coming from increased spending on food items, in particular fruits and meat and poultry, as well as on increased spending on school costs, both school supplies and school transportation. We also had some results that were more suggestive of things that could be adjusted in the program as it moved forward. One of them was that there, at the time, was no impact on school attendance or healthcare attendance as the conditionalities had not yet been implemented. We found something of a puzzling impact on women's reported decision-making, which was further explored in the qualitative evaluation in the 2022 round. Mostly what our conclusion has been is that that was a short-term negative result concentrated in women with less education and possibly related to decreased employment for women. But it has not been sustained. But it was something that was brought up as, okay, the program is maybe not having one of the expected results that it was planned to. And we also looked at the targeting. When We found overall the targeting was really effective, but one of the things that we pointed out is that the urban core were much less likely to be included in the rural core, and that there was a lack of understanding of program conditions. So some of these findings then were reflected in the policy recommendations. Our major finding was that the program was incredibly effective. It should be continued to fund it and even expanding the coverage. We also talked about how the targeting could be improved, including better outreach, particularly in urban areas. And this is something that even at the time when we presented it, Her Excellency Dr. Levine said, you know what, this is something that we would like to plan to do, and that has actually now been done, as well as improving communication regarding program design and conditionality. And then as well, working towards a comprehensive social protection strategy. This is something I think that has been very much implemented and was as well planned. We also talked about the importance of improving transparency and communications regarding the status of applicants. We've seen a lot of kind of improvement of that when we came back and did the second round evaluation. And pointing out that there might be a need to explore additional measures to promote women's decision making, as giving transfers alone didn't change women's status in the household. So these are all things that we've seen that the ministry took on and had very good reaction to, that they are not, some of the things were things that they had heard before anecdotally, but it was helpful to provide this really rigorous quantitative evidence to say, okay, this is something that we can really see in the data that's going on in the program. As well as overall this very strong impact results showing that the program was working, was getting to the households, and was having a really positive impact on the program, which has supported the ministry in advocating for expanding the program. I'm going to kind of skip over the 2022 survey because and results. This is something that the full report is out, and we'll hopefully be having a dissemination event on in the next few months. In terms of other ongoing work beyond that main regression discontinuity analysis, we're also doing a heterogeneity analysis, as I mentioned, using administrative data to measure changes in asset ownership between the original registration and recertification. So that should be one way that we can overcome this disadvantage of the regression discontinuity approach, only telling us what the impacts are on households near the threshold. We'll be able to say, okay, how much stronger are the impacts of the capital on the households who are the most poor. We also have some ongoing work on demographic targeting analysis. In the 2017 results, we found that the impacts on consumption are higher for households with older heads. And analysis of Elam P.S. panel data showed that as you can kind of intuitively expect, households accumulate assets over time. So old households with older heads tend to have a higher PMT score relative to their consumption than households with younger heads. Meaning that for a given PMT score, older households are poor. And we actually came out with that result in concert with seeing that that's something that the capital program had already implemented to put in separate cutoffs by household head age. So that provided, again, kind of quantitative evidence for something that had already been suggested as a policy that was being implemented. The other major piece of ongoing work that I wanted to share with you today is the FORCE evaluation. FORCE is a new economic inclusion program to graduate beneficiaries of the capital and profit to economic self-reliance. It has two different modalities: asset transfer, which you'll hear is very similar to the design of the BAB-ML evaluation, and wage employment, which is actually quite unique and innovative. It's a pilot program with 50,000 participants, at least the part that's funded by the World Bank. And so we were able to do a randomized control trial. We set this up similarly to the Egyptian Food Bank evaluation with a cluster randomized trial at the village, at the sub-village level in this case. And the goal is to measure impacts of force on income and consumption, as well as looking at differences in impact for different types of households. So we conducted the baseline survey in January to February 2022. It's quite a large household survey with 24 eligible households per village. And we actually surveyed not only households that are definitely participating because there's some self-selection going on, but a random sample of eligible households in all communities. So what's been shared already and what's available if you look at the full report online is a baseline survey providing really detailed description of the work skills, current employment, and time use in eligible households. And that's already been shared with the ministry and has been used as an input to some program design decisions. We then have a midline telephone survey, which is tentatively planned for late this year, where we'll be measuring the program uptake and impacts on employment and household production, to be followed hopefully by an endline survey, where we'll actually see whether households have been able to increase their consumption. That's it. The last slide was just pointing out that kind of the third step in this process of working on research and then policy communication. And then the final step is really reaching out beyond Egypt and the local policy environment to see what are the lessons that we can share with the wider development community internationally. So we have the policy briefs published, we have the full reports. Then the next step is actually to move on to journal articles. We have one journal article accepted at Economic Development and Cultural Change, and a couple others that are now in progress.
Thank you so much, Dr. Skandar, for sharing the presentation. It's actually very nice to see this very positive results for the Capital program. And it's great since we have the Capital team here as well, Mr. Raft and the rest of the team. It's great work for sure. I'm very impressed by the impact of the Capital, especially on women empowerment and family dynamics and other aspects as well, which is also very unique about this impact evaluation, that it's actually using a different rigorous method here, which is evaluation in this community, in addition to start using qualitative or mixed methods and start utilizing the benefit of using or adding qualitative surveys as well. Actually now we started by highlighting or sharing results on the impact of providing food boxes on poor households. Then we moved to the impact of the Kafla and the Karama or the Digital Transfer Program on also poor households, followed by highlighting some main points about the Forza program, which focuses on graduating ultra poor. Now we'll be moving to Dr. Ahmed said, we'll be sharing more results or more lessons from the global evidence related to social protection, then to be followed by Dr. Ayas, who will focus on the Egyptian context and the impact of Bab Amal. So let's start by Dr. Ahmed. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ahmed. Thank you.
Sawiris Foundation and Bank for putting together this super interesting initiative and a series of seminars which are extremely useful and relevant, not only for academics but also like for policymakers and pretty much like everyone working in the area of development in the region and globally. So thank you so much and thanks for the kind invitation. My name is Ahmed Said. I'm the executive director of JPA and منها in Arabic. I'm also a social professor of economics at the University of Paris. So today I'm going to talk about like some global evidence on social protection policies, both in Egypt and globally. And I'm going to start with an overview on JPA and JPA and منها, the technique of randomized evaluations as a tool for impact evaluation, and the current evidence, the current state of evidence on this important topic of social protection, and the way ahead and our activities, current activities at JPA and منها, with a particular focus on Egypt and Turkey. So for those who do not know about the Egypt Public Action Lab, we are pretty much kind of like a global research center that works towards reducing poverty by ensuring that policy is informed by scientific evidence. This is something that we have been taking on our shoulders since 2003. So, for this goal, actually, we are not only working on research, as an academic institute, but we are working on three main interacting pillars. First one is research, and we focus there on conducting randomized evaluations to provide answers to the different pressing questions that we have out there. This is not sufficient in itself. That's why we make sure that we bring this to the hands of policymakers and work with them towards implementing those and scaling them up or down in case they don't work. We're also interested in the training aspect or capacity building and building kind of like a culture towards the use of evidence and producing them. In this regard, we are working as kind of like a network of academic researchers who exist like in almost all top universities in the globe, also in the region, who are experts on different topics. So we're not specialized in one particular sector. We're working generally on everything that touches upon poverty and poverty alleviation issues. So we have a total of 11 different sectors globally, ranging from agriculture, education, all the way to social protection, which is like extremely important sector. The way we are structured is kind of like different regional offices. We have a total of 7 regional offices. Each of them is hosted within a local university. We have got one in the US at MIT that's pretty much covering North America. We have one in South America. We have one in Europe because, you know, poverty is kind of like a global issue. You know, poverty exists also in the US and in Western rich countries. We have got one in Cape Town, covering Africa. We have one in South Asia and one in Southeast Asia in Japan. The Cairo office is at the American University in Cairo. It's like the most recent one. We started officially in 2020, but before that we have been kind of like an initiative running for quite some time. Overall, we have managed to conduct more than 1,600 evaluations all over the globe. Unfortunately, our region is still lagging behind, and actually we are taking it on our shoulders, like, you know, speeding things up and increasing actually the amount of evidence that comes from the region. And hopefully actually with having JPAL, we can reach this goal. So, what exactly randomized evaluations are? This is an important question. Randomized evaluations take a scientific approach to tackling conflict. The way it goes is you start with eligible participants. Say for example, think about any program that you're interested in evaluating its impact. You start with eligible group of people or households or villages or whatever level you are going to evaluate the impact on. And you take kind of like a baseline survey. So you count on administrative data, like what Khal was explaining. So you know like where exactly we are in terms of like, you know, the current status. And then you split those, you assign them randomly into 2 groups. One treated group and one control group. And the fact that this is happening on a random basis ensures that those groups are almost identical, like pretty much identical, not only on observable characteristics, but also unobservable characteristics, right? The only difference is one of those groups will be receiving the treatment, and the other one will be the control group, right? And then you return back again to the field, you take another measure to see the difference, and the difference you can trace for sure to the program because it's pretty much based on like randomized evaluation, right? It's not a new concept. We haven't invented this concept ourselves. It's a concept, or even as economists, it's a concept that has been there for quite a long time in the medical sphere, right? Like now we poured it from medicine. The innovation we have is like, you know, implementing this in social sciences and in economics in particular. For this, our JPAL co-founders, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Doflo, and the long-term JPAL affiliate, Michael Kramer, got Nobel Prize in economics in 2019, mainly for the extensive use of this technique, and for the research, 25 minutes. Okay, so I'll speed up. For research that has dramatically improved our ability to fight poverty in practice. Right now at JPAL MENA, we are growing very fast. So we have like 60 staff members. The majority of them are based in Egypt, at the American University in Cairo. We have also got an office in Morocco that focuses on employment issues, Morocco Employment Lab. We have 34 randomized evaluations between completed and ongoing, and we're working on 8 different sectors. We have been building partnerships with different stakeholders in the 2 countries, mainly in Egypt, and this has been the case even before we became officially an office. So, very quickly, I'm going to give like what the evidence tells us about social protection. So what do we mean by social protection? We define social protection here as the wide variety of programs that aim to provide financial assistance to low-income families, insure them against shocks, and break poverty traps. Right? So anything that goes in this direction could classify as social protection. So with social protection, we seek to do 2 main things. First, to improve lives of people experiencing chronic poverty, and second, to prevent people from falling into chronic poverty. So this ranges from cash transfers, cash or in-kind transfers, school feeding programs, public works, active labor market programs, social insurance or pensions, maternity benefits. Recently, particularly after COVID-19, there has been a massive expansion in social assistance programs. Almost all the countries are expanding their social protection programs. And we have right now, globally, more than 3,800 social protection measures taken globally. Right? This is particularly important for low and middle income countries who started even before. So there has been kind of like doubling in the number of social measures taken by developing countries long time before COVID hit. This is extremely important because, as we know, advanced countries face challenges in the program financing, design, and delivery, but low and middle income countries, in addition to these challenges, have a longer list of challenges, right? Like they have got problems with the fiscal space due to the lower tax collection to GDP ratios, as well as the constraints to borrow, both internally and externally. Challenges related to targeting, giving large informal sector, and limited information, and also inefficient markets in terms of like the labor market or insurance markets. So how should systems and programs be designed or redesigned to support the recovery period after COVID-19 and respond to future shocks and more effectively address long-term poverty? We asked a few important questions: targeting, who's eligible to receive assistance and how do we identify them? The program designs, what type of assistance do we provide? Delivery, how exactly we can ensure assistance reaches eligible families, and responding to shocks. How to ensure beneficiaries against economic, health, climate, or other risks. The targeting question, there are several ways of doing targeting, so different methods for doing this. The first one is like existing social issues. Like you have a list of people and you know exactly like which one is eligible. The second one, which is going to be referred to shortly, is the proximity listing, which is pretty much based on kind of like a survey asking people about like the assets they own, and then like with an index you can classify who's rich and who's poor. Then there are 2 other types, mainly community targeting, like counting on the community to tell you who's in the mind of the community deserves such support and who doesn't, and also self-targeting, like people just like apply for kind of like social protection programs. And all these aspects differ in terms of data availability, cost, and time to implement. And sometimes actually they are complementing each other in terms of like their effectiveness. What we find so far from the evidence using randomized evaluations is that community-based targeting and self-targeting can improve flexibility in identifying the poor without increasing targeting errors. Right? So those have been extremely useful. The community-based one, for example, has been tested in Indonesia, and the way it goes is like you give each community kind of like a fixed number of slots, and then the community itself, or the institutions within the community can identify who is eligible for this. Right? This reduces execution error and is also like quicker in predicting shocks and responding to shocks. And it also leads to improvement in the community satisfaction. So this is from a study that shows after comparing different targeting methods against each other, and this one stands out as one of the most important, or like one of the most successful in making people satisfied about reaching out to people. So I think we're asking people if they, about the number of households that should be added to this, or the number of people who should be excluded. And as you see, actually, this one is doing much better than the PMT method or hybrid methods. Self-targeting also plays a big role as an effective method to include eligible beneficiaries and keeping out ineligible beneficiaries. But the way it should be designed is like, you should make it a little bit costly for people to apply. So it has been tested before that if you make it costly by making people apply, or going to apply and exert an effort a little bit, this keeps away people who are better off from applying and competing with actual improvements. The design of transfer programs also matter. I've got only 1 minute, so I'm going to speed up. So the details matter for the transfer program, like what to give. Should we give cash, vouchers, or in kind? Right? This is like a simplistic. So this is kind of like a simplistic choice that any government will be encountering at one point, and each of it has advantages and disadvantages. So the cash, for example, gives people more choice, but the government involvement is limited. On the other hand, the in-kind is more restricted for people, and the government is more involved. I'm going to skip through this, and because it's important also to ask questions more than answering questions. Graduation approach is something that's extremely important, and Rani will be covering this in more detail and in depth with Ben Aman, which is like one of the projects that we are so much proud of at JPAL, and Rani is a co-PI of this important project. So I'm going to end up with some open questions that I believe we can try to answer and help to answer at JPAL with initiatives that we have in mind. So how can we most effectively target social assistance programs in light of rapidly changing poverty contexts, especially for marginalized groups? This is like a very important question that's still open, and it needs answers. What type of assistance should we provide? What are the gender implications of certain design features? How can social protection promote gender equality? How can we most effectively deliver social assistance? What are the impacts of providing social benefits like maternity and sick leave? And what are the long-term impacts of assistance on poverty and well-being? We try to answer this very quickly with introducing platforms like Egypt Impact Lab, which is kind of like an embedded lab with the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development. And the idea there is we try to help the government answer the pressing questions, the development questions, before investing a lot of resources into those, right? So the idea is like, to evaluate the impact of different programs by running randomized evaluations before bringing this to the field. And this is pretty much kind of like a measure of effort with different partners, including the Ministry of Social Solidarity, National Council for Women, Ms. Maida, and also with support from the funding partners, Sawiris Foundation, Community Jameel, and additional funding from UNICEF. With this, we hope actually to answer a lot of these questions and provide lessons not only for Egypt, but also globally. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking it too long.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, for highlighting and introducing the definition of social protection, as well as highlighting the increase in poverty rates and social protection programs across the globe. Thanks again for highlighting the 3 main challenges for social protection, which are targeting, design, and governance, as well as the roles that the Egypt Impact Lab can play in improving, hopefully, the social protection policies in the future. The laptop is about to die. Charger. So now we will move more closely on focusing on social protection evidence from Egypt, right? So 5 years ago, Sawiris Foundation, in cooperation with BRAC International and the Abdulatif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, started a social protection program with the aim of scaling it up on a national level. We called it Bab Amal, and it was inspired by Parties Ultra Poor program, right? Dr. Ragi is one of the main principal investigators for this program, and Dr. Ragi will be sharing some of the very exciting results about this program for the midterm evaluation. And I leave you now for Dr. Ragi to share his results. Thank you. So they asked me to introduce Dr. Ragi. So I would like to introduce Dr. Ragi Asad to share the results of Bab Amal project. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Abdul Rahman. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me to share this wonderful experience. Bab Amal is, as Ahmed said, a type of graduation approach. The graduation approach is really a relatively new approach that has become very popular internationally to fight poverty, in particular because it's proven its effectiveness in a number of other contexts, in its ability to really shift people out of poverty, to graduate out of poverty. So the idea behind it is that you have the poor are trapped into what are called poverty traps. And poverty traps mean that if you have small amounts of help to the poor, are not enough to get them over the boundaries and to make them on a trajectory of getting out of poverty. So you need a big push approach. You need an approach where you give them a big push, an effective push, so that you can graduate them out of poverty and then they can be on a self-sustaining track of increased income over time. So Bab Amal is such an approach. It is a pilot program that is adapting intervention that was developed by BRAC, which is a Bangladeshi NGO that's very famous. And it is targeting 2,400 extreme poor households in Asut and Suhaq, the two poorest governorates in Egypt. And it's implemented by the Sawiris Foundation in cooperation with two development NGOs that are working on the ground. I have to say that I would at least like to think that I take a little bit of the credit for having introduced Sawiris Foundation to the graduation approach, spark that interest, and to JPAC to be able to evaluate that approach. So I'm so glad that so many years later, it's actually coming to fruition in a very nice way. So the approach is really quite a comprehensive set of interventions. You will see the interventions on multiple axes centered around the transfer of an asset. So the asset transfer is the core of the interventions, but there are a number of other supporting interventions to help the households that are receiving the assets actually be able to take advantage and learn about how to make an income from the asset and not, as a result of crisis or poverty, consume that asset and then be unable to get out of poverty. So, so the idea is to create a sustainable livelihood out of that asset transfer. Now, there are a number of partners, as I mentioned, who are part of this BAFAML program. BRAC, conceived of the graduation approach internationally and helped implement it in a number of contexts and evaluated. In fact, the very first famous impact evaluation across 9 different settings that showed very, very promising results was published in Science magazine, which is one of the most hard to publish periodicals. And that really gained a lot of academics and policymakers' attention around the world. Of course, the Sawiris Foundation, I mentioned, and then the NGOs in our suite, we have Giving Without Limits, بلا حدود, and in Sohag, our partner is the Human Development Egyptian Association, which الجمعية المصرية التنموية الإنسانية. And then there are 4 of us who are the principal investigators, myself, Dr. Adam Osman, Dr. William Pariente, and Dr. Christine Valente, and they're actually going to be in Egypt, and we're going to go and do a field visit in Asyut next week with the other PIs, and so we really privileged to go see the program on the ground. So as I mentioned, the graduation approach is a set of integrated interventions. The first set of interventions are under the rubric of livelihood promotion, and this is the asset transfer, where a productive asset is transferred. We have 2 versions of the program, a full cost version and a half cost version, and I'll explain why we decided to kind of do a half cost version. So, because policymakers are always interested in knowing, can we do the same thing, less money? And so, does
We apologize for that. Usually using clothes is not easy as usual. So sorry for that.
So, as I was mentioning, we have a full cost version of the intervention and a half cost version. And the reason we have decided to do the half cost is because policymakers are always interested in knowing, can you do the same thing or for cheaper? And if you at least get half the impact with half the cost, then it's probably cost effective. But because of the notion of a poverty trap and the idea that you need a big push, there is some uncertainty that whether when you cut things in half, that you actually can get people over the poverty trap. And so we wanted to test that, that sort of hypothesis. Now, within the full cost, we have two varieties. One variety is where any member of the household can be the beneficiary and receive the asset transfer, and that's the unrestricted. And then the restricted variety is that the asset has to go to a woman in the household. And the beneficiary who gets most of the training and the focus is a woman. And we will see, actually, it turns out that that restriction was not all that necessary because women were most of the beneficiaries that the households designated themselves. So as I said, the first component is a livelihood, is a productive asset transfer with £11,000 value. This is, remember, in 2019 prices, and £5,500 for the half cost. And the assets, I'll show you the distribution of the assets, but I'll say from now they were mostly livestock in the form of sheep and goats, which is not just Egypt, but most around the world, people select to have livestock as an asset. Now, there's also a social empowerment component where you have bi-weekly visits every 2 weeks. You have households being visited over an 18-month period, in which they get coaching and also join a saving group where they can pool their savings together. Of course, when they get the asset, they also get technical and business training on how to make money from the asset, and that's a very important component. The social protection component is a consumption transfer, so a cash transfer. Again, it was for 8 months. Now, since some of our beneficiaries, about half were the Kafir and Karama recipients, they were already getting the cash transfer, so they didn't get an additional cash transfer, but those who were not the Kafir and Karama beneficiaries got the £400 per month. And of course, everything is half as much in the half-cost arm. And then finally, there's a financial inclusion component, which has to do with a savings support and savings group that meet regularly for people to be able to learn how to save and get some financial literacy and training. So these are the components of the intervention. And so there are really the three arms: the full cost unrestricted, that's intervention one; the full cost restricted, where women, female beneficiaries are the ones who have to get the asset; and then the half cost, which is unrestricted in terms of beneficiaries, but a lower amount of intervention; and then the comparison group, where there is no intervention. Now, of course, the questions that motivate the research is first, does the program work? And does the graduation program push people out of poverty? The second is, does the restriction to women help even more? So the households where you have the assets being restricted to women are receiving even more benefits through women's empowerment, greater empowerment in decision-making of women. Three, does the half-cost variation, is it more cost-effective? Are we able to get at least half the benefits from reducing the cost in half? And then, of course, comparing all of these three types of interventions together. And then the question of scale-up and what lessons can we learn in order to scale up. So here is the timeline of the program. We started in 2018 with a needs assessment and a market assessment to know what sort of activities are possible in these very poor villages in Asud and Sohag. And then in late 2018, we started with the geographic targeting. The geographic targeting used the poverty map that was created by CAPNAS and the World Bank, where every village in Egypt was ranked in terms of poverty based on poverty mapping exercise. Once the villages were selected, we didn't in fact target at the village level, but we divided villages into sub-agglomerations that are about 70 to 100 households each. And we were able to get local knowledge to be able to rank these sub-agglomerations based on their poverty within each village. And then we did an enumeration survey to enumerate all the members of the selected agglomerations so that we can do a proxy mean score based on that enumeration survey. So the targeting was geographic as well as individual targeting based on proxy mean score. And then there was a third targeting stage, which is community validation. We didn't do a full community targeting, as Ahmed explained, but we had community leaders validate the results of the proxy mean score to tell us that yes, this household actually is deserving, in fact is deserving, or that household who has a low score is actually not deserving. So there was those three stages of targeting. Now, once the targeting was done, we selected a certain subset of households within each agglomeration. So there were these large numbers of agglomerations. The agglomerations don't just give you benefits from targeting, but it also allows you to randomize across many more units than villages. So if you only randomize villages, you have usually a small number of villages in the program. You don't get enough statistical power. Whereas if you break the villages down into agglomerations and randomize at the agglomeration level, you get a lot more statistical power because you have a lot more variability in these villages. So the baseline survey was conducted. This is before randomization happens. You collect a very detailed baseline data on the eligible households. This is followed by information sessions, and in the information session, households first are asked, if you were assigned to treatment 1, which is unrestricted, who would the beneficiary be and what kind of asset would you like? If you are assigned in treatment 2, which is restricted to women, who would the beneficiary be and what kind of asset would you like? And they would be given enough time to think about their asset choices to make that decision. And also, if you were in the half-cost intervention and that's the budget you would have, what would your asset choice be? And it could be different from the asset choices in the first 2 treatments. Once we have the baseline information, this is when we randomize. And the randomization, as I said, is not at the household level, but at the agglomeration level. So you take a set of, let's say, 5 agglomerations, randomly select 3 of them to be in each of the 3 treatment arms, and 2 of them to be in the control arm. So this way you are basically randomizing at the level of quintets, 5 agglomerations at a time, or quartets, 3 treatment and 1 control, as opposed to randomizing across all the agglomerations at once. And that gives you an ability to control for the fact that these agglomerations could be different from one district to another, or from one village to another. Then the implementation starts, and that was around October 2019. And of course, we had COVID come into that period, and so we conducted some online COVID surveys to know how the households were affected by the COVID pandemic. And then we conducted a midline survey between August 2021 and October 2022, because the implementation took quite a long time. So it's 18 months after the household receives its asset that they get asked questions of the midline survey. So this has been completed, and the results I'll be showing you today are based on the midline survey. We're currently in the midst of our endline survey, which started at the beginning of this year and should go all the way to the end of the year. So by the end of the endline survey, we will have households that are interviewed 36 to 40 months, on average 40 months from the time they receive the asset, which is a sufficiently long time to try and see whether the benefits have been sustained or not. Now we're hoping that we could even do a long-term impact through an even longer-term survey beyond that, but that is currently not yet in the plans. So as I mentioned, I talked already about the targeting, 3 stages of targeting, and I will not dwell on that anymore. And this is the information about the baseline survey, which has both, so has essentially a household section, which asks about all kinds of questions at the level of the households, and then an adult section, which selects 2 adults in the households, including those who are designated as beneficiaries of the program. So here is the choice of assets that the household made at the end of the information session, based on which the treatment arm they were in. And as you can see that in the full cost arm, more than 80% of households chose livestock. So livestock here is essentially medium-sized livestock, goats and sheep. We did not have the budget to give large livestock, cows and camusas. But as you can see, and as you went to the half-cost arm, there was an option to take poultry, which is small livestock, either rabbits or chickens or ducks, and more people availed themselves of that choice in the half-cost arm. And then the non-livestock options are essentially sewing machines, dairy products, a small shop, garment trade, grocery, that sort of thing. And you can see that it's a relatively small fraction of households that opted for that kind of asset transfer. So the fact that most households chose livestock or poultry, and the fact that the division of labor in rural Upper Egypt is that women take care of livestock and poultry, meant that 88% of households in any case chose a woman as the beneficiary, even in unrestricted arm. And that the result is that there's not going to be a lot of difference between the restricted and unrestricted arm, because the households themselves self-selected to have the women as beneficiaries just by the nature of the assets that are being. So again, these are some of the numbers in terms of each treatment arm: the full cost unrestricted, half cost, full cost female targeted and control. And as you can see, the number of agglomerations is mentioned. So it's about 100 agglomerations each for the 3 treatment arms, and 137 agglomerations for the control group, which gives us a total of 2,400 treated households and approximately 1,000 control households that are being compared to. And they're more or less equally divided across Asyut and Sohag. So in the midline questionnaire, midline survey, we of course repeated the household questionnaire and the individual questionnaire that we used in the baseline, but we also added a section which is called the beliefs module, which is focused specifically on beliefs about women's employment and economic activity. We wanted to know to what extent being assigned to different arms of this intervention changed women's beliefs about ability of women to engage in economic activity, and what sort of economic activity women thought was possible for them to engage in, and what sort of expectations they had for earnings from these economic activities. And one thing I should tell you is that almost no one thinks that women should participate in wage work in poor rural Upper Egypt, right? Women think of that as being a very remote possibility. And what they want is a home-based economic activity that they can do at home and can be compatible with their household responsibilities. So I think when designing programs and you want to target women, you really have to take that into account as an important constraint. All right, so let's look at some of the results. And here we're looking at, first, of course, we're providing livestock, and so you expect that 18 months later, the treatment households should not have eaten their livestock. They should have had more. They should have more livestock than they had, than the control group had. And in fact, that is the case. You can see that the small livestock increased a significant amount. The medium livestock increased by a much greater amount, and you can see that it goes from maybe 0.3 numbers of small livestock to 1.5 for both the full cost arms, and a little bit less for the half cost arm. But most interestingly is that we were not giving large livestock. Large livestock was not part of the asset, and in fact, many of the treatment households did increase substantially their large livestock. In fact, one of the criteria for eligibility was that you shouldn't have large livestock. But what happened is that households converted their medium livestock and graduated up to large livestock on their own, which is really quite an important result in its own right. So you can see that the control group, a very, very small fraction of households had large livestock, and that increased substantially in all three treatment arms, so that households make decisions to kind of upgrade to the large livestock. Now, revenue from livestock, of course, increased substantially as a result of the program, and you can see that this big increase in revenue, especially in the medium and large livestock groups, is very high. Yes.
Sorry, just a clarification. Nor own part of a large livestock, the eligibility.
The actual eligibility, part of the eligibility was that if they had a cow or a gamusa, they weren't eligible. But I don't think if part of a gamusa, I'm not sure that was used as a criteria to eliminate. So essentially, what you interestingly see here is that the results for the half-cost arm are quite decent. They're at least half as large, if not more than half as large. So in the intermediate, so in the midline, it looks like the half-cost arm is performing very well and is performing at least as now in terms of increase in total incomes, they were more modest. I need to caution you that measuring income is tough, and people don't report their income very accurately. So, but despite that, we see 11 to 18% increase in the full cost arm in income, and 9% increase in the half cost arm. But I would say these results are preliminary and probably not the most reliable. Of course, in terms of female employment here is defined as doing market work, meaning you can be self-employed, working at home. So long as you're producing a product that you're selling, then you are employed. If you're just producing for your own subsistence of your own households, then it's not considered employment. And of course, by the fact that we're providing livestock that these households are selling, we are substantially increasing female labor force participation, or at least female employment. And you can see that these are nearly doubling, or more than doubling the rates that were existing prior, comparing to the control group. The last measure I'm going to show you is a food insecurity index. So here, zero is the mean of the control group. So we're standardizing the data so that zero is what the control group mean is in terms of the food insecurity index. And what you find is that food insecurity is reduced for the all three treatment arms. And this is, the interpretation of this is that it's reduced by 0.14 standard deviations within that normalized index, which is a decent, compared to other programs, a very decent size decrease. And you can see again, the full cost restricted and the full cost unrestricted are about the same, a negative 0.14 to 0.16 reduction in food insecurity. And the half cost here is almost half, right? Half or a little bit less than half in terms of, but it's not statistically significant in this case. So that there is a little bit of a question mark whether the half cost has managed to reduce food security substantially. Now, so what are the lessons learned? And so the first lesson I draw is that Laban is really an effective approach to reduce poverty. And of course, we don't have the full results. We didn't show you the effects on consumption, for example, which we're still working on those results. But they are showing improvements in consumption as well. And there is a potential to put the poor on a sustainable path to graduate from poverty. The second lesson I draw is that the use of the agglomeration level rather than the full village. Villages in Egypt are large, so we can divide them into these sub-agglomerations And that is beneficial in terms of targeting, and it's also beneficial in terms of the impact evaluation itself and our ability to get more precise results by randomizing at the agglomeration level. The targeting using proxy mean score with community validation seemed effective, and we really were able to get at least community buy-in in terms of the targeting. I do think that having a national proxy mean score that is potentially can be usable for targeting, subject to community validation as we have here, it would be a very useful thing. And this is a good use of the big data that Mr. Khaled was talking about, is potentially to come up with, so that every project doesn't have to do its targeting over and over again, but of course with validation. Now the results, as I already said, the restricted versus unrestricted didn't show too many differences because of the division of labor in the Egyptian, in rural Upper Egypt. The half cost versus full cost, this is where anybody who sees the results says, let's do the half cost, because it's half the cost and we're getting at least half the benefits. I would just caution this. This is the short-term results, right? But if there's a poverty trap, and the poverty trap is that as households get hit with shocks, they get pushed back into poverty, we really don't absolutely know whether in the long run these half-cost results are sufficient to push people beyond poverty. It seems to work in the medium term or in the short term, but I would say the jury is still out as far as whether those results are going to stick 40 months out or even 60 months out. So I would say yes, the half cost is promising, but it has not yet proven that it gets people out of the poverty trap. And then we are also hoping to learn a lot more about the beliefs and expectations of women's participation in economic activity in rural Upper Egypt, and what sort of asset transfers and activities would really be effective in empowering women economically, while remaining within the constraints of what's possible in rural Upper Egypt for women. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raghi, for sharing the results. But Aman, I can't thank enough our panelists today, but I would like now to open the floor for our audience questions. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll get you the mic. Introduce yourself and then ask your question. Thank you so much. Dr. Anisha.
I'm sorry, I'm jumping in because I have to leave. So thank you very much for the panel. I've got a few questions about the design and the limitations of RCTs, the limitations of the social meaning of RCTs. For example, the if-free food boxes. I mean, if one has more calorific value than the other, and if one is more expensive than the other, then it must have more effect. So I think we should be cautious about what we're measuring using an RCT. My question is actually to Sikandra and Raghi about gender as an outcome variable, or gender empowerment as an outcome variable. I think the if-free data has shown that decision-making is a very bad indicator. It doesn't work for good reason. So the question is, what are the other outcomes that could come from this rich data collection, expensive, time-consuming, so we really should optimize these outcomes, and whether the way we see agency and the way we see these agentic outcomes is more important. So in the gender assessment that we did, we found that gift-giving is a form of agency that women value. Changes in values. So I'm asking whether there is a possibility of thinking of another gender outcome, and I'm asking Raghi specifically if there's a possibility of doing an ethnography of WebML, so that you interpret this data in the context of historical changes, contextual changing, all of the kind of contamination effects that can happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amin. Let's start by asking this question first, since you don't have time. So Dr. Raghi, Dr. Ahmad, Kevin, and Sikandra.
I can start. Thank you for this question. I think this is a very good question. So let me start with the context. We are operating in a context where households are facing significant inflationary pressure. And it's not obvious what type of interventions can be effective enough. And we know from the lessons we have had from the COVID-19, it doesn't mean that every intervention we did in response to the pandemic was effective. So because of that, the setting we are operating is very intuitive, and also the interventions we are considering are very relevant. So one is a box that is offering food types that can be accessed through other interventions. So the old box is providing food items that can be offered by the Tannawin program, or food items that would be otherwise consumed by poor households. And the new box is offering slightly diversified food portfolio. And what's interesting in this setting is not just the consumption patterns, but also the relative effect of this box. So what we are saying is not what we're saying is it's not obvious that, for instance, you can see that we gave them the old box, but we don't see any impact. This is intuitive to me, and what that tells you is that it doesn't mean that every intervention works. What that means is the type of intervention and the context matters, and in the context we are operating, we see that the control group households are experiencing significant deterioration in diet diversity, and what that means is if we were not offering an intervention, the full sample would have suffered significant amount of deterioration in food security. And then beyond the consumption patterns we also see changes in preferences, and this is also important because households are facing significant inflationary pressure. They are preferring more in-kind transfers, at least as far as we can see from the data. And that in itself is intuitive and informative to what can be done for the future. Let me stop here and then my colleagues could add.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Hania, so much. For the question about the gender,
It's working.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Hania, so much for the question about gender. And I think you're really pointing out something important, which is that some of these really standardized tools that have been used in other contexts, they're not necessarily relevant for every single context. And it might need to have more qualitative work, ethnographic work to really ground that. I think at the time that we did the CAFL 2017, and even the Forza baseline, we didn't have more guidance, but this is something I hope that we can get from you, maybe in time to do the Forza endline. We did do a little bit of an expansion actually in the Forza baseline to experiment more with some more details about the women's decision making, if that's important or not. One of the questions we asked was just instead of assuming that women always want to have a role in decision making and that improves their utility, we also asked them before each kind of category of decision making, is it important for you to have a role in decision making in this household? And we found that for a lot of decisions, there's a pretty strong correlation between the types of things that they want to have a role in decision making about or power in the household on, and things that they do have power on. So that's good. I mean, it means that it's not necessarily that women want to have a role in every single decision in the household. One place where we found there was a bit of a mismatch actually was on employment, and we found that women were actually more likely to say that they would like to have some role in that decision than they were to say that they did well. So I think that's a little bit in the direction of what we can do as quantitative people, but we would love more guidance from you and from others on how we can do this better.
It's not working. Can you use this mic?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. adding to what Kiplum just mentioned in terms of the relevance of RCTs as a tool and being an impact evaluation generally speaking. I totally agree with you. Some of the questions are very intuitive and we don't need to conduct a randomized evaluation. But the randomized evaluation technique is not only used to evaluate what exactly is working, but also the channels, how exactly it works, right? So you can design them in ways that can help you answer questions that are difficult otherwise to answer, right? One of the questions, for example, putting ourselves in the shoes of the policy. If we are interested as a government to transfer, support, for example, for people, should we give this in the form of cash, vouchers, or in kind, right? It's a tricky question. I don't know each of those. It depends pretty much what exactly you want to achieve, and you need to test this in kind of scientific way to be able to say, cause it. Actually, this is causing this particular outcome, and the other one is not causing it, right? And that's why actually it could be useful in this direction and could give you answers to questions that are difficult to answer afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Hani, I think you're absolutely right that having ethnographic studies to complement these interventions is really important, and I hope that we can convince JPAD and the Sawiris Foundation to actually conduct such complementary studies. And I do think complementarity is important. So what the randomized evaluation is can establish this causal impact. Now, to understand the mechanisms and what we really paid a lot of attention to in this particular study is had this whole entire what we call the beliefs module, which is focused on women's economic participation. It really has a battery of questions about what are women's beliefs about the obstacles to engage in economic activity, what expectations about the earnings that they would get, the risks that they would face in these economic activities. And we would want to know what actually, when the intervention actually gives them an asset, does that change their beliefs? And so that is a form of empowerment in some sense, because it changes their sense of what the constraints that apply to their households. And so we haven't had time yet to do a detailed analysis of that section, but basically stay tuned.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karaman.
Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Very insightful remarks that you made. So I have a response comment on the question. So the response to Dr. Hani, and thank you so much for your comment. It's a very valid point of view that maybe since we are distributing food boxes to people, so we are expecting that the food consumption is going to increase. But one important outcome variable that we are also looking at in this study is the food insecurity state, which doesn't have to do anything with the quantity, but with the perception of the people about their food security status, which is a very important tool that the Food and Agriculture Organization is using to measure and estimate food insecurity in a given country. So it's very important for us to understand the determinants of the people's perception about their food security status. And one very interesting finding that we discovered in the data is that some people, while being, consuming sufficient quantities of food, they still report high levels of food insecurity. And this led us a couple of days ago with the FP team to think about conducting an ethnographic study or a qualitative study to further investigate the causes behind the people's perception about their food security status. And of course, we would love to discuss this with you to see how we can conduct this.
I just say before that food sovereignty is on everyone's mind, because the lack of ability of people to produce food or to engage in these value chains that are creating inflation that is unexplained and access. I think that's why when we look at food security, as IFPRI does amazingly, to look at these food production, perceptions of production, I think it would explain a lot of insecurity and also explain the effect of that other as a kind of sovereignty, this is really something that the tanween is not solving, because the tanween is creating more food insecurity. The prices are going up. No matter how much cash you add to the tanween, the fact that the supply is perceived as being problematic. So I think more of these studies that look not just ethnographically, but also at markets, at the availability of food, and the rate of inflation, and that sense of unpredictability. And of course, people losing title to land reform in the 90s, people's ability to produce food in
That's very, very interesting. I think we should agree to have one session specifically focused on foodstuffs and the food support for poor and extremely poor families. This would be a very interesting topic for everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Hani.
So if I may add a couple of things before the mayor, of course.
Yeah, we have here first, then Dr. Beck.
So very quickly, the second thing, because we talked about targeting today a lot, so this is one of the topics of one of our events that we're trying to organize, looking at different targeting methods and techniques, and probably inviting some speakers and practitioners from different countries to talk about this. Final question, and it's not a question, but it's something for everyone to ponder, because when Kibon talked about the preference of people to the food box compared to the cash equivalent, I think this is a very important insight that feeds into the current and existing debate on the cash versus in-kind transparency. And I think with our context, I think it's very clear in the Egyptian context that providing people with in-kind assistance at this inflationary times, I think it's more important and more valuable than cash.
Yeah, thank you so much, Karman. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to get the mic here, but they keep asking.
When you give people a fixed amount of cash in an inflationary context, of course they're going to prefer the in-kind because the fixed amount of cash is declining in value over time. But what if you index the cash on food price inflation? If you do that, they would definitely prefer the cash. So I think that you should not make a comparison between things that are not comparable. A declining value of cash, which is a fixed nominal, with a fixed amount of food. Right? That's not a comparable comparison. What you need is the real value of cash indexed by food prices versus the income. And that's the appropriate comparison.
I love this debate, but I think we should stop it now because we have more questions. Sorry for that. Sure. Can we get the mic closer?
أنا دكتورة حبيبة حسن واصف رئيس اللجنة القومية لعلوم التغذية وأكاديمية البحث العلمي والتكنولوجيا. My question is the first, I heard the mention of the Food Insecurity Index, and as far as I know, it is for over 18 years old who express their opinion on food insecurity. So I would like that this is confirmed, because a lot of the use of this index, when I am looking for the health and nutrition of children, it does not apply. It is not the insecurity of the child, but it refers to the insecurity of over 18 years old, as far as I know. Now my second query is, I'm very much surprised in the lack of interest of women in rural households for poultry. Because I was part of the report of the Egypt report to the UN, where after the assessment of the impact of the avian influenza, at that time, when the avian flu came, 85% of poultry production was not produced. Now the balance has changed. We are having at the Academy a symposium on the 9th, which we will discuss the significance of poultry farming or poultry production in Egypt. This is Tuesday on the 9th. In this respect, all the of what was mentioned just now as restrictions and obstructions before existing restrictions and obstructions before production of food. Now this is vitally important for the nutritional chain. Protein malnutrition in stunting increases with the decrease of production of hormone. So I would like you to find some solution to promote poultry production in-house in rural households. This has a direct reflection on child nutrition.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your question. We can get 2 more questions, and we can get all the answers at one time, if you don't mind. Dr. Mangi, do you have questions?
Actually, my first question is related to the food boxes, because I think we need to know some information to put the results in context. For example, the food box is covering the whole month. It's covering, is it weekly? Is it monthly? And does it, what is the percentage of coverage for the food that the family, the household is consuming? And does it differ from according to the size of the household or not? This is my first question. The second question is for Dr. Rehla, and I would like to, of course, to thank all the panel for an excellent presentation. It was very informative. Actually, I was trying to put myself in the shoes of the policymaker. I do not like to be in the shoes, but let me just put it theoretically. I think it's important to put these numbers in the context that will be understood by policymakers. Because in many cases, policymakers tend to oversimplify things, and sometimes they can do it very simplistically. My suggestion is to relate the amount of money that is coming here to graduate households from poverty, to relate that to what the government is already paying, but also to have a sense of the scalability. For example, if I'm saying that on the average a household will need, say, £10,000 to get out of poverty, is this scalable? Can you apply it to the whole number of families? Well, at some point, or at one point of the time, the number of people who are getting, say, poultry or whatever, if it increases a certain amount, then it's not going to work. To give the policymaker a sense of what it should do. Because I think that the evidence is very nice and it's very important, but the problem is with oversimplifying things from the side of the policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mangi. Last question, then we'll start answering.
Thank you, and thank you for the rich presentations. My name is Dalia Boutou from FAO's Regional Office for the Near East and North Africa. My question is for you, Dr. Rogi. Did you get a sense from the data that there's a difference between the outcomes for those who chose non-agriculture-based assets and those who chose livestock? Because has the model that FAO implements for about 90% of our projects, and personally I'm getting the sense that livestock is a dangerous asset to distribute in the long term because of the costs related to veterinary services, animal feed, and there's also an environmental cost to supporting livestock value chain. So is there a difference? And then my second question is there plans for an impact evaluation after the project, so a year or two after the close of the project? Because all of our impact evaluations that are done just after the project closes while we're just exiting the field give very positive results. But a year or two later, I hear just through word of mouth a different story. So I was wondering what your thoughts were. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So should we start by the questions we got here about the food index, if I remember well? I think if we can start with that, and then we can follow with the question from Dr. Mangi, and then from there.
Thank you, Dr. Halra. You're right, I think. So this index is only relevant to adults, and we applied it to adults. Our respondents are female-headed households and adult females. So That's correct. There was a question about the boxes in terms of the frequency, and I think I'll leave half of the question to you. The beauty of having the implementing partner together is we can leave some of the questions to you. But the boxes are offered every month to the household. So you have the box that comes every month, and in our case, households have received so far 3 or 4 month boxes. Yeah, let me stop here.
Yes, so let me answer also, because we use the food insecurity index, and you're absolutely right, it's a self-reported based on a number of indicators about skipped meals, about having enough food, being able to buy a certain variety of foods, but they're all applied, as you said, to adults. Ideally, we want to be able to do anthropometric measures. We want to do height for age and weight for age for children. That is costly, and that's why it was skipped in these. But if the money were available to do that, I would definitely recommend. It's a very essential set of measures we want, because you're absolutely right. The poultry, for example, I think the increase in stunting that we saw in Egypt in the 2000s is clearly related to government's effort to prevent households from keeping poultry. And so now, why households are not choosing poultry? It's because of that risk. Because before, they were asked to kill their poultry. And so there is a risk. And therefore, households would rather choose the mid-sized livestock, which is increasing in price quite rapidly, and therefore is less risky. Now, the other thing we found that we have to provide insurance against death of the animals, because, and we provided that as a component of the project. If the animal dies within a certain number of months, they get indemnified for that death, and that's a very important part of the security of the asset for them, so that they don't take the risk. Now, on the respond to the question on livestock, but I think economically you can show now that livestock, we haven't done the comparison yet, and it would not be really part of the design, because people show self-selected into livestock versus non-livestock assets, and so even if that comparison would not be randomized and it would be unreliable. But my sense intuitively is that livestock prices went up more than anything else, so that the economic benefits of owning livestock are a lot better than the other activities, which were sewing or a small grocery store, etc. So I do think that there is still tremendous demand for protein in the Egyptian market, and this is one way that the very poor households can take advantage of that increase in demand and that increase in price. And so I do think that there are some advantages to
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if you answered Dr. Maggie's question or not.
Dr. Maggie. On the policy, in fact, we are in the middle of that discussion, because the Sawiris Foundation is engaged in, wants to engage in a scale-up activity, and whether we should do it at the half cost, since it seems to be working fine, or should we go at the full cost? And I do think that also the issue of whether we should make it a loan that is reimbursable versus a transfer that is not reimbursable. My view on this is that I'd like to have a little bit more time to look at the long-term impact, because while we look at the midline, which is right at the end of the program implementation, the end line is 18 months after the program ended, and this is where they're no longer getting support in those second 18 months, and so are the benefits still continuing equally for the two. But in terms of cash transfer versus loan, I am very convinced that if you want to reach the ultra poor, therefore you have to have targeting, a cash transfer, a transfer is necessary rather than a loan, because I don't think that if they have to pay back, that they would actually be able to even engage in that activity. The risk is too high. But if the policymaker is able to have a targeting system in which some people can get a full transfer, some people can get
subsidized loan, and some people get a full loan at market rates. This would be the ideal way of structuring the intervention, but of course one has to know what those thresholds are. This intervention was about the ultra poor, and in that case we feel that if you want to get somebody ultra poor out of poverty, you need at least a £10,000 asset limit. But that's not to be applied to the entire population.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ahmed, Iskander, would you like to add anything from your side? Yes, please. Thank you so much, Dr. Iskander. I hope we answered already the question from Dr. Habiba, Dr. Magid, and Ms. Dalia from the FAO. Unfortunately, we have to conclude now. We don't have enough time. But please, I know you still have a lot of questions. Please feel free to share your questions over the email. We'll be thrilled and honored to respond to you in coordination with our panelists. I can't thank the panelists enough for all the amazing presentations and all the great information you shared with us. Thank you so much, and we can. Okay, and we'll start with the very last part of our session, which are closing remarks. Thank you. So, Dr. Kepler would like to come on.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Thank you for joining us for this event. Thank you for the questions. They are definitely relevant and issues that help us to think more. I'm very happy to see all this full house, and I'm very happy for the partnership we have with the Sawiris Foundation, the Egyptian Food Bank, and I'm also very happy to have our colleagues from the JPOL and others who joined for this event. We will continue with the seminar series. We will have more exciting sessions and exciting topics, and stay tuned, and thank you very much.
شكرا لكم جميعا على الحضور النهارده، وان شاء الله يعني نتمنى ان احنا تكون السيشن بتاع النهارده كانت مفيده بالنسبه لكم. هيبقى في ايفنت تاني ان شاء الله خلال شهرين باذن الله. هننفايت البراند ستيك هولدرز تو ذا توك، وباذن الله هنتواصل معاكم الفتره الجايه بالنسبه للفعاليات اللي جايه، ولو في اي صور او اي حاجه اعتقد ان هي تبقى كمان للمشاركين النهارده. اشكركم جميعا على الحضور.
مرة تانية بنتكلم كتير النهارده، شكرا جزيلا لحضراتكم، شرفتونا، انبسطنا قوي بالدسكشن، يا رب نكون قدرنا نفيد حضراتكم بجزء من المعلومات الموجودة. دي زي ما قال كرماني وزي ما قال كبرم، دي أول سيشن من عدد كبير من السيشنز ناويين نعملها مع بعض إن شاء الله الفترة الجاية في أشكال مختلفة، مش كلها هتكون حاجات كبيرة ومنفتحة زي النهارده، بس هنحاول قد ما نقدر إن احنا نوصل الدسكشن او النقاشات اللي هي متعلقه ب ازاي نقدر نستخدم الادله العلميه في العمل التنموي. احنا كسويرس فاونديشن لسه عندنا الالتزام بتاعنا ان احنا نشير كل حاجه بنعرفها، اخطائنا قبل نجاحاتنا، عشان خاطر نقدر نساعد في ان احنا نعظم الاسره ان شاء الله. احنا كمان لو انتم مهتمين بالادله العلميه، الخميس الجاي عندنا مؤتمر تاني هنبدا نبعت لحضراتكم ايميلات عليه، ما بقاش نبعته قبل كده، هيكون بالشراكه مع JPOL، وكمان اخر الشهر ان شاء الله هيكون عندنا شكل من اشكال المؤتمر وهو اللونش ليه الاستراتيجي بتاعتنا ان شاء الله. مش عايز اطول على حضراتكم اكتر من كده، ده اعلان او استغل الفرصه بس مش عايز اطول على حاجه اكتر من كده. شكرا جزيلا 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 لحضراتكم وشرفتونا، شكرا جزيلا.